Hey there. Tonight, we're stepping into the shadow behind the shining armor, the truth beneath the legend of the medieval knight. You've heard the stories: gallant heroes, noble quests, chivalry etched into history. But the reality was colder, heavier. A life spent not in glory, but in bruises, silence, and service. These men were forged in frost, trained through pain, and bound by duty to lords who rarely remembered their names. For every tale of honor, there were years of obedience, hunger, fear. If these kinds of quiet, honest journeys through history help you unwind, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if it genuinely brings you peace. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. It's strangely comforting to imagine the lantern glow of other screens, flickering across distant rooms. Now dim the lights, settle your breath, and come walk the long, weary path behind the visor. This is what it really meant to be a knight. You don't begin your life as a knight with a sword in your hand. You begin with a door closing behind you. You are 7, maybe 8, and the world you know, the one of your mother's cooking and your father's voice, ends quietly on a frostbitten morning. There's no ceremony, no tearful farewell. Your parents, bound by duty or ambition, send you away to another household. A noble family, they say, a place where you'll learn discipline and honor. But what you find is stone, cold, towering, and indifferent. The castle walls rise above you like cliffs, their windows narrow and watchful, their gate yawning open like the maw of something ancient and hungry. You clutch a bundle of clothing and try not to cry. The servants don't greet you. The other boys don't look up. You're ushered inside, told where to sleep, when to wake, and what you now are: a page. That word carries weight, but not the kind you imagined. It means chores. Endless ones. You wake before the sun and scrub muddy floors. You carry buckets of water that slosh down your boots and freeze your toes. You clean chamber pots without protest and polish cutlery until your fingers ache. You run errands for people who don't remember your name and shout at you when you're too slow. Some days you don't speak at all, unless you're answering "Yes, my lord," or "No, my lady." Your voice is not your own. It exists only to obey. There is no play, no comfort, just the rhythmic labor of survival within the shadow of high stone walls. In moments between tasks, you learn to observe. You watch how the older boys bow, how they stand, how they vanish when tempers rise. You study the hierarchy in silence, noting which knights are cruel, which servants are lenient, which corners offer a breath of peace. If you're lucky, you're allowed to carry a message to the steward or serve wine during a feast, moments that feel like theater with you as a background prop. You think often of home, but never aloud. To show longing is weakness. You begin to forget your parents' faces and remember instead the scowl of the stable master, the sting of cold soap on raw knuckles, the echo of laughter you're never a part of. The first winter is the hardest. The stone floors leach the warmth from your bones. Your straw mattress is thin and damp. You learn to sleep curled into yourself, using your bundled cloak as a blanket, hoping no one wakes you early. But they always do. Before long, you stop expecting rest and start measuring comfort in degrees of discomfort. You are not training to be a knight yet. You are being stripped down, reshaped. Not through swordplay, but through silence, labor, and obedience. The castle does not teach. It wears you down until what's left is someone who no longer flinches at orders, no longer questions pain. This is where it begins, not in glory, but in surrender. Time stretches differently inside the castle. Days are long, repetitive, and indistinguishable from one another, and yet the weeks vanish without warning. You begin to forget what season it is outside, unless it leaks in through the walls. bitter wind sneaking through the cracks, or the reek of summer sweat gathering in unwashed corners. As a page, your life is carved into tasks that never quite end. You sweep the great hall, polish the iron sconces, fetch water from the well in the courtyard so many times your arms burn. The moment one task is done, another appears, as if the castle itself conspires to keep you in motion. You are never still unless someone else tells you to be. You rise before the first bell and sleep long after the last torch in the hall has gone out. You carry trays of food to nobles who don't see you and scrub rushes from the floor while their dogs sniff at your heels. You learn to fade into the background, to exist only in service, invisible until needed. What little rest you find is not your own. Even sleep is alone, taken back if the chamberlain calls for you or a guest arrives late and needs assistance. Meals are quick, often in the kitchen or standing in the hall, crumbs wiped from your hands before you're sent on another errand. Bread, cheese, maybe some dried meat if you're lucky, but always eaten in a hurry, eyes darting toward the door in case someone calls your name. You're not just expected to obey. You're expected to anticipate, to know what is wanted before it's spoken. When a noble enters the room, you're meant to straighten, bow, offer your assistance without hesitation. If they frown, you apologize. If they slap you, you bow again. There is no argument, no fairness, only hierarchy, heavy as the stones in the wall. You watch the knights from a distance, their polished armor gleaming, their presence commanding. They seem otherworldly, powerful, until you see one of them drunkenly knock over a candelabra or curse when his boot splits open. Then you realize they bleed too. They falter. They are not gods. Still, to you, they are unreachable. You are not training with them. You are cleaning up after them. Your world is buckets, brooms, trays, and orders barked without warning. Occasionally, you are permitted into the armory, usually to carry equipment or oil leather straps. You breathe deeply, taking in the scent of steel and sweat, wondering when your turn will come. But then you are dismissed, told to fetch firewood or hold a torch while a knight sharpens his blade. You nod and obey, the longing sitting like a stone in your gut. The sword is not yours. The title is not yours. All that belongs to you is your silence, your tired limbs, and your place near the back of the hall, where pages stand still and history marches past them, unseeing. Your training, when it begins, is not the noble art of swordplay whispered about in songs. It starts with bruises, small at first, then deep and purpling, and with wooden practice blades that hit just as hard as steel when swung by boys desperate to climb higher in the castle's silent hierarchy. You're thrown into drills with the other pages, most of them just as young, just as scared, and just as eager to prove something. The masters don't explain much. They demonstrate once, bark an order, and expect you to get it right. If you hesitate, they shove you back into position. If you stumble, they shout. No one tells you how to stand, how to breathe, how to avoid getting hit. You learn by getting hit. A lot. Your arms sting from repeated strikes, your legs buckle under sudden tackles, and your hands shake from gripping the wooden blade too tightly, too long. You fall constantly. Onto dirt, onto stone, into horse troughs. There is no praise for effort, only correction. You are told to fall better, to stop flinching, to take the hit and stay standing. Pain is a constant tutor, and you are expected to listen. You don't cry, you don't complain, you swallow the pain, the humiliation, the aching soreness that crawls into your joints and settles there like an old tenant. You walk stiffly through the halls, trying not to limp too noticeably. The older boys notice weakness. So do the squires. If you wince too openly, someone makes it worse. At night, you trace the shapes of bruises beneath your tunic and try to pretend they're proof you're learning. When someone mentions glory, you think of the splinter lodged in your thigh. When they say bravery, you think of the moment you stood too early and caught a staff to the ribs. You do learn, eventually. You learn how to keep your feet planted, how to duck without looking afraid, how to aim for the shoulder instead of swinging wildly. You learn how to fall and land without breaking a bone. You learn which instructors are cruel for sport and which are just tired of failure. You learn the subtle difference between being tested and being targeted. In time, your body begins to anticipate the blows. Your hands adjust to the weight of the weapon. It's not strength exactly. It's survival instinct refined into habit. Still, nothing feels heroic. Not when your hands are blistered and your back is sore, and your days begin with swinging a blade and end with cleaning chamber pots. You realize that this is the process. Not noble, not grand, just grueling repetition until something in you hardens. No ceremony marks the change. One day, you swing without fear. One day, you fall and get up faster than you used to. No one claps. No one notices. But you do. And for now, that is enough. The castle is always loud when you're meant to be quiet. Boots on stone, doors slamming shut, voices rising in drunken arguments that echo through the halls long after the sun has set. But for you, silence is survival. As a page, you learn quickly that attention is dangerous. Your job during feasts is to disappear into the rhythm of service, moving unnoticed between nobles, balancing pewter platters piled high with steaming meat and trenchers soaked with grease. Your arms tremble, not from the weight, but from the tension of trying not to spill. The nobles barely acknowledge you. At most, you receive a nod or a flick of the fingers. More often, they talk over you, around you, never to you. You hear everything: gossip, insults, secrets not meant for your ears, but you're expected to remember none of it. Your silence is a given, your presence invisible. Sometimes a lord will snap his fingers and you'll rush forward only to be scolded for being too slow or too eager. You learn to hold your breath, to move with calculated grace, to blend into the carved walls and candlelight. And still, you're not invisible enough. If a noble grows angry, if a dish is cold, or a goblet too empty, it's your fault. You bow, apologize, and take the blame. That's your place. Not among the honored guests, not among the minstrels or lords or knights. You are the boy with the tray, the servant with blistered hands, the shadow that shifts from table to table without ever sitting. The hall is a stage, but your role is always behind the curtain. The music never plays for you. When the feasting is over and the nobles retire, your work continues. You clear the mess, sweep the rushes, scrub the floors slick with spilled wine, and worse. Some nights you catch your reflection in the polished metal of a serving tray. Exhausted, dirty, eyes rimmed with shadows, and you hardly recognize yourself. There are moments when you pause near the hearth and listen to the minstrels' fading songs, ballads of knights and maidens, of bravery and honor, of noble battles and eternal glory. You stand in the corner, still as a statue, heart aching for the version of knighthood those songs promise. But then a drunken knight vomits near the fire, or a noble woman snaps at you for breathing too loudly, and the illusion vanishes. These are not the stories the bards sing. This is not the world of honor you imagined as a child. Here, chivalry is something spoken of in verses, not lived in the corridors. Here, your name is not worth remembering. You finish your work in silence and slip back to your straw mattress, wondering how many more nights you'll endure before someone sees you as more than just another boy holding someone else's burden. Discipline isn't taught gently in the world of a knight. It's hammered into you like iron, without apology, without softness. As a page, every mistake becomes a lesson, and every lesson is etched into your back, your pride, or your hunger. You learn quickly that there is no forgiveness for forgetfulness. Fail to bow low enough to a noble, and you're yanked aside and scolded publicly. Misplace a pair of riding gloves or deliver a message too slowly, and you're punished with extra chores, skipped meals, or worse, public humiliation that makes the older boys smirk and the squires look away in indifference. There's an unspoken rule that nothing is ever good enough. You don't get thanked for doing something right. You get noticed only when you fail, and so you learn to fear attention, to dread the sound of your name said aloud. Some days the punishment feels random, arbitrary. A knight in a foul mood might snap his belt across your back for standing in his way, or accuse you of insolence if you hesitate before fetching his wine. You nod, apologize, and take it, because resistance would only make things worse. You're told this is how boys become men, that harsh discipline builds character, and that suffering in silence proves you are worthy. But all it really teaches you is how to endure pain without flinching, how to suppress your voice, and how to disappear when anger walks the hall. The chaplain talks of virtue and humility, of turning the other cheek and bearing burdens with grace. But in the castle, humility isn't a choice, it's a requirement, beaten into you day by day. You witness other boys break under it. One forgets to remove his cap in the presence of a visiting lady and is forced to kneel in the chapel for 2 full days, praying for forgiveness as others step over him. Another is caught with a stolen apple and is beaten before the entire staff. No one comforts him. No one speaks of it afterward. You learn from their pain. You internalize the fear, and you adjust. Your posture becomes more precise, your bows deeper, your apologies quicker. You begin to anticipate the moods of those above you, learning to read their silences, their tempers, their tells. You stop thinking of justice. That's not your world. Your world is obedience. And when someone shouts for a page, you run without thinking, because hesitation might cost you everything. There's a kind of numbness that creeps in, a hollowing of the self, until you're less a boy and more a tool, silent, sharp-edged, and used often. But even as that numbness grows, some part of you still remembers why you came. You endure because somewhere, buried under duty and bruises, is the promise that all this pain has a purpose. That one day, you'll be the one giving the orders, not receiving them. That one day, you'll be called something more than just boy. The chapel is cold every morning, no matter the season. Its stone walls seem to trap the chill like a secret, and you feel it in your bones the moment your knees hit the floor. There's no fire here, no warmth in the candles that sputter beneath icons of saints and martyrs. You sit among the other boys, stiff and shivering, trying not to let your teeth chatter during the morning prayers. This is how every day begins, not with swordplay or grand adventure, but with ritual. You learn the prayers by heart before you understand the words. You mouth Latin phrases with half-shut eyes, memorizing rhythms rather than meanings. Faith, you are told, is as essential as steel. A knight must be devout, obedient to God before king, before lord, before self. But what you feel in those early hours is less like piety and more like punishment. You pray because you must. You confess even when you have nothing to confess. The priest speaks of sin, of damnation, of fires far hotter than anything the hearth could offer. You believe him because fear is easier to learn than faith. You hear stories of saints who walked barefoot through deserts, of holy men who fasted for weeks, and wonder if your own suffering counts. You kneel until your knees ache, your back rigid from trying not to slouch, trying not to attract correction. Some boys doze and get rapped sharply on the head. Others whisper prayers with such frantic devotion you wonder what guilt they're trying to hide. You keep your eyes low and your voice steady, trying to find the line between invisible and devout. Religion is not comfort here, it's structure, a discipline just as strict as sword training or household service. After Mass, you're expected to recite catechism, to remember saints' names and church doctrine, to understand the difference between mortal and venial sin. But no one explains why. No one asks what you believe. You are not being raised to question, only to follow. You begin to see religion as another part of your armor, something you wear, something you display, something you must carry regardless of how heavy it feels. Occasionally, a knight speaks of divine purpose, of being chosen, of God's plan in battle. You hear him, but it doesn't match the reality of your scraped knees and sleepless nights. Still, you pretend it does. You nod, like the others. You keep your head bowed. And in time, the rituals become a kind of rhythm, not meaningful, but familiar. You find yourself praying not for wisdom or salvation, but for warmth, for sleep, for a day without pain. You light candles and watch the wax drip, imagining what it would be like to melt and vanish. And still, you show up each morning. Still, you kneel. Because that's what knights do. They endure the cold, even when it seeps into the soul. You eat fast, because the moment you slow down, someone finds a reason to pull you away. Mealtimes are not breaks, they're borrowed moments, snatched between errands and orders, and always overshadowed by the knowledge that your next task is already waiting. Breakfast is usually just bread, hard, dry, often stale, and a piece of cheese if the kitchen isn't hoarding it for the nobility. If you're lucky, there might be a bit of cured meat, something salty and tough that takes longer to chew than it's worth. Water is drawn from barrels that smell faintly of wood and dust, and wine is reserved for those with titles. You eat standing up, behind the kitchen door, or crouched in a hallway near the warmth of the ovens, always ready to leap to your feet if your name is called. You don't linger. The cook doesn't like pages getting underfoot, and lingering invites suspicion of laziness. Food becomes fuel, nothing more. You don't savor, you devour. When vegetables appear, they're usually boiled to a pulp or served with suspicion. Many still believe that raw greens cause illness. Even fruit is a rare guest on your plate, and when it does appear, an apple, a handful of berries, it's usually bruised and shared in secret among the younger boys. Your hands are rarely clean when you eat. You've just finished mucking out the stables, or scrubbing a chamber pot, or polishing tack for a knight's horse. No one cares. There are no napkins. You wipe your mouth with your sleeve and go back to work. On feast days, everything changes, at least for a few hours. Roasted pigs, golden-crusted pies, honeyed oat cakes, and mulled wine fill the air with a scent so rich it almost hurts. But even then, you don't eat first. You serve. You carry dishes steaming with gravy, your stomach twisting with hunger as nobles pluck drumsticks and laugh. You stand at the edge of the great hall, back straight, eyes down, trying not to breathe too deeply, lest the smell overwhelm your discipline. If food is left over, you might be allowed to scrape the platters in the kitchen afterward. Cold meat, half-eaten bread, crumbs soaked in fat. You eat that too. There's no shame in it. Hunger teaches you not to be proud. Some boys dream of banquets. You dream of warmth, of a whole loaf to yourself, of a meal where you don't have to earn every bite with a bowed head. Sometimes the cook takes pity on you, slips you something warm when no one is looking. Those small kindnesses are remembered for years, but they don't change the truth. As a page, you eat only when your labor allows it, and you learn quickly that a knight's strength does not come from noble feasts. It comes from enduring hunger without complaint. There's nothing glamorous about a latrine. And yet, for a page, it becomes one of your many thrones of humility. Cleaning chamber pots is not the kind of training they sing about in ballads, but it's one of the first and most consistent lessons in knighthood. If you can't stomach filth, you have no place wearing steel. You start by carrying buckets, heavy, sloshing things that reek no matter how tightly you try to grip the lid, and you carry them down stone stairwells, through narrow passages, to the designated dumping pits on the far side of the castle grounds. The smell follows you. It clings to your tunic, works its way into your skin, and no amount of scrubbing with cold water or ashes seems to rid you of it. Some boys gag the first time. Others vomit. You're expected to keep working through both. Holding your breath doesn't help. It only makes you lightheaded. And there's nothing more dangerous than passing out with a full chamber pot in your hands. The older pages are no gentler than the masters. They watch with amusement, offer no help, and sometimes push you while you work, just enough to make you stumble. If it spills, you clean that too. There is no such thing as too dirty for a page. You scrub with rags so worn they may as well be twine, your hands raw from lye and friction. You learn to take pride in efficiency, if nothing else, getting it done quickly, without incident, without complaint. Some try to hide their disgust behind jokes. Others go silent, eyes glazed, focusing on the rhythm of their hands just to endure the smell, but no one escapes it. Even in the great hall, when you stand with your hands folded behind your back, the faint odor lingers. You catch nobles wrinkling their noses when they pass too close. You don't explain. You don't defend. It's just another part of being invisible. What makes it worse is the knowledge that knights once did this too. Every man you now serve with bowed head and lowered gaze once carried the same buckets, knelt by the same cesspits. And yet now they mock you for doing what they endured. You wonder if they've forgotten or if they just don't care. Either way, it teaches you something unspoken but vital. There is no dignity too sacred to be stripped away in service. This, you realize, is what the early years are for, not learning to fight, not studying warcraft, but learning to serve without pride. To clean what is foul, to work in silence, to carry filth and still show up the next day ready to bow. If you can't endure this, you'll never survive the rest. Knighthood, it turns out, is less about honor and more about how much indignity you can carry before you break. Friendship, when it comes, is not loud or obvious. It's not the grand loyalty of epic tales, not sworn oaths under moonlight or blood-bonded brotherhood. It begins with a shared glance across the training yard when you both fall hard and lie breathless in the mud, too bruised to move. It forms when a boy slides his crust of bread across the table without speaking, because he knows you missed your meal fetching water for the steward. These are not the friendships of songs. They're forged in silence, in misery, in the grind of long days spent under someone else's orders. You and the other pages are not equals, not yet. There is always competition, always someone watching, waiting to rise higher by stepping on the next boy's back. But within that struggle, small alliances take root. You whisper to each other in the dormitory at night, passing stories of home, dreams of knighthood, rumors about which knights are cruel and which ones might offer mercy. Laughter becomes rare treasure. A joke from the kitchen, a squire's embarrassing misstep, a fart during chapel. These tiny sparks keep the cold from settling too deeply in your chest. You laugh quickly and quietly because joy is fleeting and too much noise invites correction. Some boys retreat inward, become shadows. Others become bullies, lashing out at those lower than them to feel taller. You learn who to trust, and more importantly, who to avoid. The friendships that survive are those built not on shared ambition, but on shared suffering. There's a strange intimacy in exhaustion. when your arms are too tired to lift another bucket and someone grabs the other end without being asked, or when a blow during training leaves you dizzy and a hand steadies you before the instructor sees. You don't speak of these things. Gratitude is shown through action, not words. A piece of stolen fruit left on a straw pallet, a shift in chores silently taken, a warning muttered under breath when tempers flare near the Lord's chambers. In a place where kindness is rare and authority absolute, these moments become your anchor. You begin to understand that survival isn't just about obedience, it's about knowing who you can stand beside when the day turns cruel. No one wants to break alone, and even though you are all here to someday stand apart, as squires, as knights, there is comfort in knowing that for now, you are enduring the same storm. You all share the same sore muscles, the same hollow hunger, the same bruises that bloom under tunics and never get mentioned. And so, while the lords and ladies glance past you and the knights bark their orders, you find something solid beneath it all. A shared look, a smirk during punishment, a silent understanding that says, "We're still here." And sometimes, that's enough. Winter in the castle is a slow, grinding torment. The stone walls that keep enemies out do nothing to hold warmth in. They radiate cold, soaking it into your skin, into your bones, until even your breath feels brittle. You wake before dawn to find your cloak stiff with frost and your fingers too numb to tie your belt. The straw mattress offers no comfort. It's damp, flattened, and smells faintly of mildew and unwashed feet. No fire is built for you. The hearths are reserved for the lords, the knights, and the honored guests. If you want heat, you stand near the kitchen ovens and hope the cook doesn't shove you out. You learn to layer your clothes, to stuff rags into your boots, to keep moving even when your muscles ache, because stillness is a sentence in itself. Your hands crack from washing cold stone floors with colder water. You wrap them in strips of cloth and keep working. Snow finds its way through every crack in the shutters, and wind whistles through the corridors at night like a voice reminding you how far you are from comfort. Tasks don't stop because the temperature has dropped. You're still hauling buckets from the well, still mucking out the stables, still standing at attention for hours during ceremonies and church services with your teeth clenching against the chill. Some boys develop coughs that never go away. Others get fevers, and if they're lucky, the chaplain gives them broth and rest. If they're not, they're left to sweat it out, wrapped in a horse blanket and laid on straw. You learn to fear that hoarse rattle in the chest. It's the sound of someone slipping towards something worse. No one wants to say plague, but everyone thinks it. The food worsens in winter. The bread is tougher, the cheese sourer, the meat salted so heavily it cracks in your mouth. Fresh anything is a memory. You eat in silence, huddled near the least drafty corner you can find, fingers trembling as you chew. Sometimes, when the sky is white and the air sharp, you allow yourself to stare out through a slit window, imagining warmth as something more than a rumor. But daydreams are dangerous. They slow you down, make you careless. And carelessness in winter can mean frostbite, punishment, or worse. You envy the knights with their fur-lined cloaks and thick boots, though you know most of them froze through the same misery when they were your age. But that thought offers no comfort. It only means you'll likely suffer like this for years to come. Winter teaches you something few lessons ever do. Survival isn't about strength, it's about endurance. There is no honor in shivering through a sleepless night, no glory in chapped lips and blue fingertips. But you endure it anyway because you must, because spring always comes eventually, and because to become a knight, first you must learn how to suffer without flinching, especially when no one sees it. The training yard is where illusions go to die. When you first imagined knighthood, it was a blur of banners, bold charges, and shining swords. But here, under the gray sky and the constant clang of practice weapons, knighthood becomes something far more painful and far less poetic. The The ground is hard-packed dirt in summer, frozen stone in winter, and mud the rest of the time. You're out there almost every day, rain or shine, swinging wooden blades that leave splinters and welts across your skin. The instructors don't care if you're tired, don't care if you've been up since before dawn running errands. You fight until they say stop, and even then, you don't relax. You brace for the blow that might still come. There's no room for hesitation. If you flinch, someone hits you harder. If you strike too softly, they say you're wasting time. You learn to strike with force, not elegance. You learn to parry not because it looks noble, but because not doing so gets you knocked to the ground. And you get knocked down, often. Sometimes by mistake, sometimes just to see how fast you'll get up. The instructors say falling is part of learning. That may be true, but rising is the part no one helps with. Your knuckles split open on rough practice hilts, your shins bruise under misjudged kicks, and your back aches from the armor drills. Even though it's not real armor yet, the padded surcoats and weighted belts they make you wear might as well be iron. You're soaked in sweat before midday, and by the time you finish, every limb feels like it's been wrung out. If you show pain, they mock you. If you grimace, they push harder. Only the boys who hide their suffering earn a nod of approval, and even that is rare. Most days, you're ignored. No praise, no acknowledgement, just more drills, more repetition, more exhaustion. Sometimes you see the knights watching from the edge of the yard, their arms crossed, their faces unreadable. You wonder if they remember what it felt like to be you, or if they've buried it under years of hardened silence. You fantasize about showing them your worth, about a perfect strike, a flawless block, but those moments never come. There's always someone faster, stronger, more experienced. You are not exceptional. You are just another boy trying not to collapse. When the session ends, you don't rest. You clean the yard, gather the weapons, and report to your next duty. You limp through the halls and scrub floors with trembling arms. You fall asleep with aches that stretch from shoulder to heel, only to wake up and do it all again. This is where the myth of the knight begins to crack. Not in battle, but in the quiet agony of being shaped into something useful. You don't feel like a hero. You feel like raw material, and the forge shows no mercy. At 14, the title changes. You're no longer a page, you're a squire, but the suffering doesn't lessen. If anything, the weight gets heavier, because now you're expected to carry more than buckets and platters. Now, you carry weapons, you carry armor, you carry a knight's reputation on your back, and if you fail, the blame is yours alone. The tasks don't vanish, they evolve. Instead of sweeping halls, you polish breastplates until your fingers go numb. Instead of delivering messages to the steward, you memorize battlefield commands and serve as your knight's second shadow. You rise earlier and sleep later, your days dictated by his whims. His horse to saddle, his boots to clean, his meals to arrange, his mistakes to absorb. You follow him everywhere. If he drinks too much and slurs an insult, you're the one who smooths it over. If he rides out too far and breaks a bridle, you're the one who takes the blame for not tightening the straps. You are a constant presence and a constant afterthought. And yet, this is considered progress. Now you train with steel instead of wood. Now you spar with squires who have years more experience and aren't shy about drawing blood to prove it. There is no protective padding, only bruises and the expectation that you'll learn to tighten your grip and ignore the sting. You're finally allowed to mount a warhorse, but only after cleaning its hooves and feeding it oats with your bare hands. If the horse throws you, which it often does, you land hard, alone, and rise again quickly to avoid being seen as unworthy. Pride is a luxury you cannot afford. The older squires mock hesitation, and the knights are watching, always watching, for signs of failure. You study battlefield formations, shield drills, lance technique, and etiquette in the hall, all while still performing every thankless task that comes with being someone else's servant. No one tells you that becoming a squire isn't a reward, it's a test, a long, slow crucible in which you're expected to endure more than ever before with less margin for error. The punishment for mistakes becomes more severe. A misjudged word during a diplomatic dinner can cost you weeks of stable duty. A dull sword can mean public humiliation in front of visiting nobles. You begin to measure your worth in silences, how few times your name is called in anger, how few bruises bloom on your face after a sparring match. You still sleep in the servants' quarters, shoulder to shoulder with boys who dream of titles but wake to the same bone-deep weariness. There are moments, brief, flickering, when your knight nods at your work, or a visiting lord asks your name. Those moments keep you going, not because they promise anything certain, but because they suggest a future beyond servitude, a future where the armor you carry might one day belong to you. But deep down, you already suspect. If it does, it will come at a cost you haven't even begun to understand. Armor is never as noble as it looks. When you're a boy, watching knights stride across the courtyard with steel gleaming like mirrors, you imagine invincibility. You think of legends, of dragons slain and enemies felled with a single blow. But the first time you wear it, even just a partial set, you realize it's more prison than protection. The weight alone is staggering. Dozens of pounds strapped across your chest, shoulders, legs, and arms, pressing you downward like invisible chains. It doesn't feel like donning glory. It feels like drowning on dry land. Your movement's slow, awkward. Every step takes twice the effort. Every turn feels like trying to pivot inside a coffin. You sweat through your tunic before you even draw a sword, and by the end of a single drill, your limbs tremble from strain. The inside is padded, yes, but that doesn't make it comfortable. The padding traps heat, soaks in sweat, and rubs against your skin until it blisters. Your collar chafes your neck raw. Your fingers go numb in the gauntlets. Breathing becomes shallow beneath a closed helm, the stale air pressing back against your lungs. Visibility shrinks to a slit, and sound becomes muffled, distant, as if you're shouting underwater. You feel less like a warrior and more like a man sealed inside a bell, ringing with the dull thud of every strike you fail to parry. The armor is supposed to protect you, but it doesn't make you fearless. It makes you slow, vulnerable in new ways. Fall in it, and you'll struggle to rise. Step into a bog or a flooded field, and the weight drags you down like an anchor. You've seen a squire fall in a river during training, his foot caught in the mud, his chest plate filling with water. He nearly drowned before 3 others pulled him out, gasping and white with panic. Knights rarely speak of these moments. They talk of honor, of duty, of standing tall, but they leave out the bruises beneath the mail, the way armor reshapes your body and limits your breath. They don't tell you that even the best forged plates pinch, creak, and chisel into your bones if worn too long. And you wear it long. All day during training, sometimes for hours during ceremonies, or while guarding a noble who insists on your presence like a piece of moving furniture. You can't stretch in it. You can't scratch an itch. You can barely relieve yourself without help. Yet you're expected to move with grace, to strike with force, to embody chivalry while shackled in metal from throat to toe. And when it's over, when you finally unbuckle the last strap and feel the rush of cool air on your skin, it's not triumph you feel. It's relief, like stepping out of a cage. But you know you'll wear it again tomorrow, and the day after that. Because a knight doesn't get to choose the weight he carries, only whether or not he can endure it. The first time you're allowed to ride a war horse, you expect something like flight. You imagine soaring across fields, banners trailing behind, the world bending to your command from the saddle. Instead, you're met with a creature that outweighs you 5 times over and has no interest in your dreams of nobility. The horse does not care that you're training to be a knight. It cares that your hands are unsteady and your legs uncertain. It senses your fear like smoke and reacts to it. The moment you mount, you realize how high off the ground you are. One wrong move, one startled flinch, and the ground will rise up to meet you fast and hard. And it does, again and again. You fall so often you start to dread the clink of tack in the early mornings. The training yard becomes a place not of triumph, but of bruised ribs, jarred spines, and humiliation. The other boys laugh when you tumble. The knights shout instructions with no patience, as if centuries of horsemanship should settle into your bones overnight. But there is nothing natural about staying upright on a creature built for war. The horse is not gentle. It is bred to trample, to kick, to charge headfirst into chaos. You try to guide it, to control it, but control is a myth in those early days. You yank the reins too hard, or not enough. You lean too far forward, or too far back. You lose your stirrup mid-turn and feel your heart catch as the saddle slips beneath you. Some boys break bones. One squire dislocates his shoulder and is mocked for crying out. No one slows the training. Pain is expected. Fear is a sign of weakness. And you are not allowed to be weak. So you climb back up, again and again, jaw clenched, legs shaking, until the mounting block feels like a scaffold. And even when you finally stay mounted, when you manage to walk, trot, maybe even canter in a circle without falling, you realize the real test hasn't even begun. The armor comes next, then the lance, then the drills where you learn to control a living mountain while trying to strike a target or dodge a blow. The noise is overwhelming. The motion is relentless. Every part of your body aches from gripping, balancing, correcting. You smell of sweat and leather and fear, and still you press on, because giving up isn't an option. You watch your knight ride ahead during inspections, his horse disciplined, his posture perfect, and you wonder if he ever felt this helpless. You wonder if he remembers what it was to be so small on something so powerful. But he doesn't speak of those days. No one does. You are expected to become capable through suffering, not instruction. So you suffer. You fall. You rise. And little by little, you begin to move with the horse, not as one, but as two creatures with an uneasy truce. That, you're told, is the start of mastery. You spend years preparing for battle, but nothing prepares you for your first. Not truly. The training yards teach you to swing, to block, to fall, and rise again. They teach you form, posture, discipline, but they cannot replicate the chaos, the noise, the smell of war. When the day finally comes, when your knight is summoned and you are told to ride with him, you feel something you don't dare name. Not pride, not fear. Something closer to stillness, like the pause before a storm. The ride is long, quiet, save for the armor clinking with every step of your horse. No one tells jokes. No one sings. You reach the field at dawn. The grass is already churned with footprints. The banners rise. You try not to stare too long at the men across the line, their eyes, their armor, their weapons gleaming in the light. They do not look like enemies. They look like you. When the horn sounds, time splinters. Everything becomes motion and thunder. Horses scream. Men yell prayers and curses. The first impact is like slamming into a wall at full gallop. You're not sure what you hit. You only know your shoulder wrenches sideways and your vision goes white for a moment. The noise is unbearable. Steel on steel, steel on bone. Someone is shouting near your ear, but it's lost in the crashing around you. You swing wildly, unsure if your blow lands. Your horse bucks beneath you, panicking. A man falls to your left, shrieking. Another rides past, his mouth open in a silent cry, blood trailing from his leg. You feel something strike your side, hard, and for a moment, you think you're going to fall. But you don't. You hold, somehow. You keep riding, your breath coming in gasps, your hand frozen on the reins. It lasts minutes, maybe hours. You lose track. You know only the pounding in your chest and the sting in your arm and the unbearable weight of your own helmet pressing into your skull. Then, as suddenly as it began, it's over. The horn sounds again, and the line breaks apart. Men stumble back. Some don't rise. You find yourself sitting atop a horse that no longer wants to move, staring at the wreckage left behind. Mud and blood and broken lances litter the field. You taste bile. You feel your knees shake. There's a smear of something on your gauntlet. You don't know if it's yours. No one congratulates you. No one says your name. You are told to follow your knight, to help tend his wounds, to gather the fallen equipment, to ride back in silence. And you do, because that's what a squire does. And as you ride, you understand something you never learned in training. Battle is not glory. It is confusion. It is terror. It is surviving one moment at a time. And once you've seen it, once you've heard the screams and smelled the fear, the old songs feel different. You hear them now not as truth, but as comfort for those who never saw the truth for themselves. The first time you wear chainmail for more than an hour, you think your skin might never forgive you. It's heavier than you imagined, heavier even than the instructors warned, dozens of pounds of metal dragging down your shoulders, biting into the flesh beneath your collarbone, shifting with every step to chafe the same raw places again and again. There's a particular kind of ache that comes from wearing it all day, an ache that settles into the muscles of your back, the curve of your neck, the soft insides of your elbows. And it's not just the weight, it's the itch. The mail catches on your tunic, pinches your skin, and leaves small red welts where the rings bunch or rub. You sweat beneath it constantly, even in the cold. The padding underneath, the gambeson, is thick and quilted, meant to soften blows, but it traps heat and moisture like a woolen prison. After a few hours, the sweat begins to sour. You smell yourself before anyone else does. And still, you're expected to train, to fight, to stand for hours in the sun while your instructor drills you through stances and footwork as if you weren't slowly being cooked inside your own armor. Taking it off doesn't bring relief. Not really. The moment you unbuckle the mail and peel away the soaked gambeson, you're left with a body marked by your effort. Bruises, blisters, heat rash, a soreness that lingers like an echo. You scrub yourself raw in the cold water barrel behind the stables, trying to wash away the stink, the sting, the fatigue. But some things stay. The smell clings to your clothes, the soreness follows you into sleep, and the weight remains in your memory long after the armor is folded and stored. The worst part is knowing that this is only the beginning. Chainmail is basic compared to plate. You'll graduate to heavier, stiffer, even more unforgiving gear as you rise. You see the knights wear it, stoic, unreadable, and wonder how they endure it. You wonder if they feel what you feel, or if the years have made them immune to pain. They never speak of it. They never complain. That silence becomes part of the armor too. You learn to walk stiffly, to brace for the tug at your neck when the mail shifts wrong, to roll your shoulders quietly when no one's looking. You practice staying still even when every inch of you wants to fidget, because movement draws attention, and attention draws criticism. The chainmail doesn't make you feel strong, it makes you feel trapped. But you wear it anyway, because to remove it during drills is to invite questions, mockery, punishment, and because wearing it is a rite of passage, not to comfort, not to safety, but to endurance. A knight is not defined by how he fights in armor. He is defined by how long he can bear it before he breaks. And you are learning, slowly, painfully, not to break. They teach you that love is part of a knight's duty, but not the kind of love that warms you. It's ritualized, distant, and often painfully hollow. You're told to admire a noble woman from afar, to compose verses in her honor, to dedicate your victories to a lady whose voice you've never heard and whose name you barely know. It's called courtly love, and you are expected to participate in it as though it were a sacred rite. You copy lines from troubadours and minstrels, practicing your penmanship while your fingers are still sore from training with a lance. You memorize phrases about beauty and devotion and suffering, even as you scrub chamber pots and bruise your knees in the chapel. None of it feels real. You know the women you're supposed to praise see you only as a servant, if they see you at all. They walk past you in silk and perfume while you carry firewood, too filthy and tired to even meet their gaze without drawing a scolding. And yet you are told to adore them, to honor them with poetry and self-denial. You're expected to fight for them, bleed for them, uphold their virtue as if it were your own armor. But love, like everything else in your world, is a performance. You write lines by candlelight because it's required, not because you feel anything behind them. If you're clever, you recite them during feasts, hoping for a smile or a nod of approval. If you're lucky, a lady might offer a handkerchief, a token to tie to your arm before a tournament. But it's not affection, it's pageantry, a staged exchange that benefits her as much as it flatters you. Some squires take it too seriously and find themselves mocked for it. Others ignore it entirely and are accused of lacking refinement. You try to walk the line, earnest enough to appear noble, detached enough to survive it. What no one talks about is the loneliness beneath the gestures. Real closeness is forbidden, especially if you're low-born. A glance held too long, a word spoken out of turn, can get you removed from service, or worse, branded as insolent. You learn to love with silence, with restraint, with eyes cast down. And all the while, the stories of chivalry echo in your ears. Tales of knights who fought for the honor of queens and died with their names on trembling lips. You begin to understand that those stories were written by men who never served as squires. The truth is, affection in your world is rationed like food, given sparingly, if at all. You watch other boys fall in love with ideas, with names, with smiles that mean nothing. You watch them stumble, humiliated, and you take note. You learn that being a knight means learning not only how to fight and serve, but how to feel without acting, how to admire without touching, how to long without hoping. And in time, you master the most painful skill of all, pretending that this too is enough. You learn quickly that loyalty is a one-way road. Your lord is the sun around which you orbit, and your own needs, your own name, your own pain are mere shadows beneath his glow. You're bound to him by oaths, by ritual, by the expectations of a system that tells you loyalty is virtue and obedience is sacred. But nothing protects you when that loyalty is tested. The knight you serve may be brave, he may be noble, but he may also be cruel, reckless, or indifferent to your suffering. And you have no say in the matter. If he strikes you in anger, you apologize. If he misplaces a weapon, you take the blame. If he falls from his horse, You are punished for poor tack. Your life is spent anticipating his moods, learning the pattern of his silence, his outbursts, his hungers. You learn to watch the set of his shoulders, the way his voice tightens when speaking to other nobles. You become fluent in his wrath. The worst part is that no one warns you. The stories never mention the blows behind closed doors, or the quiet shame of being berated in front of servants who pretend not to hear. You carry the bruises in silence because to complain is to betray. You are taught that your knight is your family, your guide, your protector. But the truth is more complicated. You are his responsibility, yes, but also his property. If he succeeds, you may be praised by association. If he fails, you may be shamed in his place. When he is favored at court, you stand taller. When he falls out of grace, you fall with him. There is no separating your fate from his. You watch squires dismissed for minor slights, sent away for misjudging a word, for angering the wrong guest, for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And those are the lucky ones. Others are beaten, publicly humiliated, or forced into months of the lowest labor to make an example. You live in fear not of failure, but of proximity to it. You tread carefully in conversations, in actions, in every nod and gesture. And still, you care. You try to serve well, because you know that your future hinges on his success. If your knight becomes powerful, if he is granted land or honor, you may rise with him. But if he falters, you are left behind like a spare boot after a campaign. Some squires grow hard, distant, emotionless. Others become sycophants, desperate for approval. You try to be something in between, a quiet shadow, competent, dependable, never too close. It is a strange kind of devotion, forged not in admiration, but in necessity, a loyalty born not from love, but from survival. And you begin to understand the unspoken truth of knighthood, that a knight is only as noble as the man he serves, and sometimes that nobility is a lie you must help carry. Tournaments are supposed to be the shining jewel of knighthood, the chance to display your skill, win favor, and taste something like glory without the risk of actual war. That's how the minstrels sing it, anyway. But from the moment you step foot into the field, as a squire preparing for your knight's bout, the illusion shatters. The tournament grounds are chaos dressed in bunting, mud and sweat disguised as pageantry, brutality hidden beneath heraldry. Your job begins at dawn. You wake before the sun, hauling armor, weapons, and supplies to the edge of the field. You oil the leather straps, test the weight of the lance, polish the breastplate until your own reflection stares back at you in warped gleam. The crowd gathers in their finery, nobles and merchants, children with sweetbread in their hands, all eager for the spectacle of combat. But for you, it's a grind. Your knight may be nervous, temperamental, drunk, or all three. You must dress him with care, speak only when spoken to, and stand by as he rides into the arena. And then you wait. You watch from the margins as horses thunder past, lances splinter, men crash into earth, sometimes not rising. This is not the honorable contest you were promised. It's a trial of violence, thinly veiled as sport. The knights fight for pride, for coin, for reputation, but they fight hard. Bones break. Teeth are knocked loose. Blood stains the sand. There's cheering, laughter, even betting. You don't cheer. You're too busy hoping your knight doesn't fail, because his loss will be your punishment. If his armor buckles wrong, if his sword isn't sharp enough, If his steed stumbles, it all comes back to you. And if he wins, you do not share in the reward. You carry his dented shield back to the camp, sweat through your tunic while he accepts applause and prepare for the next round. Sometimes you're called upon to fight in the lesser games among the other squires. No armor, blunted weapons, but the bruises are real, and so is the fear. You swing until your shoulders burn, duck too late, fall to the jeers of the crowd. If you lose quickly, you're a disgrace. If you fight too well, older squires take note and make your life harder. It's a no-win game. At night, the grounds fill with laughter, spilled wine, the music of flutes and drums. You don't join the revelry. You mend torn surcoats, reshoe horses, massage cramping muscles. The knight you serve may pass out in the mud or vanish into the tents of a noblewoman. You guard the gear while others sleep. And in the morning, you do it all again. The tournament is a show, yes, but you are part of the machinery that keeps the curtain raised. There's no song for the squire who stood in the mud, patching a cracked shield while the crowd roared for someone else's victory, but he's the one who bleeds too, only quietly. Feasts are supposed to be the reward, the moment when the hard labor pauses, when the fire glows warmly instead of menacingly, and the smell of roasting meat makes you feel human again. That's what you think, the first time you're told there will be a banquet. But when the day arrives and you're ordered to report to the kitchens before the bells finish tolling, you learn that feasts aren't for you. They're for the lords and ladies, for the minstrels and merchants, for the guests who will never taste the ash of the fire they're gathered around. You spend hours hauling barrels of ale, turning spits until your arms feel like rope, and arranging place settings that must be perfect or risk the ire of the steward. The kitchen is chaos. Steam, shouting, knives clattering, geese weaving underfoot. You are slapped, scolded, and ignored all in the same hour. By the time the feast begins, you are drenched in sweat and grease, your tunic clinging to your spine. But you cannot rest. The real work is just beginning. You carry trenchers of steaming meat through corridors slick with spilled wine and straw. You dodge drunk nobles and leering guests, always one misstep away from disaster. No one makes room for you. They expect you to be invisible. When a knight grabs a roasted leg from the platter before you even reach the table, you simply bow and move on. You refill goblets, scrape bones into buckets, and remove soiled linen while trying not to gag. The smell of roasted pork blends with the scent of unwashed bodies and candle smoke into something dizzying. Music plays, lively, enchanting, but you hear it only in fragments as you move back and forth, serving and clearing, serving and clearing. There are no chairs for you, no bites from the feast you helped build. If you're lucky, a kitchen maid slips you a bit of crust or a cooled piece of gristle behind the door. That's your reward. That and the privilege of standing silently against the stone wall while men with too much wine in their bellies laugh about wars they didn't fight and loves they didn't earn. Sometimes the entertainment gets violent, a drunken brawl between knights, a game that turns to humiliation. You stand still as tempers flare and eyes glance your way, hoping no one decides that tonight's amusement should involve you. When the hall finally empties, your night is far from over. You clean. You scrub blood from the flagstones, polish silver dulled by greasy fingers, gather shattered glass and vomit-soaked rushes. Your arms ache. Your knees throb. The food is gone. The music has faded, and still you work, long after the torches have burned low. You crawl into your straw mattress near midnight, stomach hollow, ears ringing. And as you close your eyes, you hear the echoes of laughter, sharp and distant, and know that for those who feast, you are not a guest. You are furniture with legs. And tomorrow, the hall will need sweeping again. Knighthood teaches you contradictions, and nowhere is that clearer than when you're ordered to recite poetry with the same mouth that was bloodied in the yard hours earlier. They say a knight must be both warrior and courtier, and that means you must learn to wield language like a blade, clean, sharp, graceful. You are taught to write love letters even as your wrists ache from holding a shield too long. You practice calligraphy with fingers still bruised from your last sparring match. There's no room for sloppiness. The steward inspects your penmanship as harshly as your posture. You copy lines from ancient poems, praises of distant women, odes to lilies and virtue, while biting back yawns and ignoring the throbbing welt forming beneath your eye. If you're noble-born, a tutor might hover at your shoulder, correcting your Latin. If you're not, you learn through watching others, memorizing verses, whispered between chores, scrawling practice lines into the dust with a stick when no parchment can be spared. The absurdity of it never quite fades, how you can be expected to write of love and piety in the morning and break a boy's nose by afternoon. But that's the expectation. Refinement through violence. Civilization bound in bruises. In the great hall, you are sometimes called to read aloud. Your voice must be steady, polite, controlled. No emotion, no stammering. If you stumble over a word, laughter follows. If your accent betrays your origin, someone will notice and remember. So you practice. In the dark, under your breath, even while mucking out the stables. You repeat the words over and over until they become as familiar as a prayer. What they mean, in truth, hardly matters. Their beauty is assumed. And still, you cannot afford to forget a single line. Some knights are better at this than others. Some quote scripture at banquets. Others hide their illiteracy behind jokes and loud confidence. You're expected to find a balance. Too clever, and you're mocked for airs. Too dull, and you're passed over. The pressure to appear cultivated weighs as heavily as your armor. During festivals, you might be asked to compose a verse on the spot, to entertain a lady or impress a lord. Your mind races. You draw from half-remembered poems, twist old lines into something new, pray that no one sees the panic behind your smile. A few wrong words, and you're the fool for the evening. Yet every time you manage it, every time your voice holds steady and your words land clean, you see a flicker of something across the faces of the nobles. Not admiration, but acknowledgement. And that, however brief, is fuel. So you keep writing, keep reciting, keep playing your part in the quiet theater of civility, even as your knees bruise, your sword hand trembles, and your nights are spent in sweat-soaked straw. Because the ideal knight must be as fluent with ink as he is with iron. Even if, some days, both feel like they were made to bleed you dry. When you're finally called to ride out for war, the story shifts, but not in the way you once hoped. You imagined glory, banners streaming behind galloping horses, righteous battles fought for causes that mattered. What you find is mud, endless mud. Mud that sucks at your boots, clogs the hooves of your horse, weighs down every wheel and thought and step. The campaign begins not with the trumpet of destiny, but with a long march in silence. You ride for days across countryside that smells of manure and rot, passing through villages so poor they barely lift their eyes to your column. You expect cheers. You get shuttered windows. You're not a hero here. You're a threat in steel. And for what? Most squires never know. Land disputes, succession claims, unpaid taxes, reasons passed down in vague mutters by knights who themselves only half understand. You just follow orders. You ride where told, sleep when permitted, and hope your armor doesn't rust through in the night. Supplies are scarce. The bread is hard enough to chip a tooth. Water tastes of the barrel it came from, or worse. If you're lucky, your knight shares his better rations. If not, you go hungry or trade favors with the quartermaster. You sleep under the open sky when there's no tent, or crammed against other squires in damp shelters when there is. The air smells of sweat and mildew, and no matter how cold it gets, you're expected to rise before the sun, saddle the horse, and be ready before your knight even stirs. The fear creeps in early, not of battle, but of illness, of injury, of making the wrong impression. A twisted ankle might leave you behind. A missed command might cost you your place. Your eyes stay wide even when exhausted, scanning faces for moods, for signs of movement, for the chance that today might be the day swords are drawn. When battle finally arrives, it's nothing like the stories. There are no duels beneath fluttering banners, no clean victories. There's screaming. There's blood. You barely know who the enemy is, just that they look like you and want you dead. You swing without aiming, duck without thinking, survive on reflex and terror. Afterwards, you help gather the wounded. You see a man you spoke with the night before groaning in the dirt, half his face missing. You smell burnt hair and torn flesh. And then you're told to mount up and keep riding. There are always more towns to burn, more fields to trample. You learn not to ask why. The cause, whatever it was, no longer matters. You ride not for honor, but because not riding means punishment. Or worse, being left behind. And as you travel farther from the castle you once dreamed of rising through, you begin to understand. The knight's life is not a tale of noble conquest. It's a cycle of orders, violence, and silence. And the further you go, the less of yourself you remember, until even your dreams march in formation. Fear is a crime you're not allowed to confess. You feel it, of course, tight in the chest, rising in your throat like bile, but to show it is to invite ridicule, suspicion, punishment. A knight must be brave. A squire must be braver. You're not just expected to face danger, you're expected to do it with composure, with elegance, even with a hint of gallows humor. But fear doesn't care about expectations. It creeps into your mind during the long marches, when the forest grows too quiet, when every branch crack sounds like an ambush. It presses against your ribs during drills with heavier swords, when you know the older squire across from you fights with something to prove and no concern for your safety. It visits at night, when your body aches and your thoughts race with what-ifs. You've seen boys fail to hide it. One froze in a practice skirmish, dropped his weapon, and backed away, hands trembling. The instructor struck him so hard his lips split open, not for cowardice, at least not openly, but for disobedience, for losing control. Another flinched during an armor inspection, and the knight he served had him stand in the yard through the night, rain soaking his gambeson until his teeth chattered audibly. You're taught that fear is weakness, and weakness must be burned out of you like rot from timber, but no one teaches you how. There are no lessons on what to do with your pounding heart, with the way your breath shortens when the war horn blows. So you hide it. You learn to mask it beneath a clenched jaw and a steady hand. You joke because laughter is armor too. You jab your friends in the ribs before battle and smirk like you're not silently counting the number of men around you who might not see another dawn. You tell yourself that real courage isn't the absence of fear, it's pushing through it. That's what they say. But they never tell you how many push through and still don't come back. Some boys break entirely. They run or sob or go silent and never really speak again. And the worst part is, you're told they deserved it, that they weren't strong enough, that they failed the code. So you learn not just to fight fear, but to resent those who show it. Because if you don't, you might end up like them. And so the fear never leaves. It just moves deeper inside. It sharpens your senses, shortens your sleep, keeps you alive, and eats at you, silently. In battle, you charge when told. You scream not in rage, but to drown out the sound of your own terror. You strike fast, because hesitation means death. You never know if you're brave or just practiced in hiding. But no one asks. They see you upright, armored, eyes forward. And that's enough. Because in this world, surviving is the only proof of courage anyone cares about. You were raised to believe in honor. That word was spoken in the chapel, shouted in the training yard, whispered into your ear when your knees bled on stone floors. But now, as a squire grown older and wiser than the songs ever hinted, you see what they never warned you about. Honor is often just a word, and a fragile one at that. You watch knights you once admired cut down surrendering enemies. You hear them speak of noble causes by firelight, then march the next morning to raise a village that refused to pay. You serve lords who swear oaths to each other, then break them before the wax seals are even cold. And still, you are expected to believe. To uphold a code that few follow, to carry the illusion of virtue even as it crumbles around you. You ask no questions, because questions are dangerous. You are told that justice is for the righteous, but you see how it bends beneath gold, how it favors the powerful. A nobleman's insult can become a duel. A peasant's complaint becomes a whipping. You're expected to defend the weak, but only if the weak are worth defending in the eyes of your lord. You are told never to strike an unarmed man, and yet you see it done, with excuses as polished as their gauntlets. When you clean their armor, you notice blood in the grooves, not always from battle, not always from men with swords. There are no ballads about the girls who cry behind stables, or the farmers begging as their land is seized by right. You see it all, and you are silent. Because speaking costs more than bruises. It costs place, future, maybe even life. So you learn to nod when honor is mentioned and keep your real thoughts buried under layers of duty. Some squires become disillusioned. Others double down, desperate to believe the legends they grew up with, convincing themselves that their knight is different, that the ugliness they witness is an exception, not the rule. You try to hold the middle ground, but it wears on you. You begin to feel like a fraud when you kneel in prayer, like a liar when you repeat your vows. You feel the gap between what you serve and what you believe widen with every passing campaign. And still, you sharpen swords, you polish boots, you fetch wine for lords who quote scripture after murder. Because the system survives not on truth, but on performance. On boys like you, pretending it all still means something. You wonder sometimes if there are knights who feel the same, who carry their doubts beneath their breastplates like a second, heavier heart. But you'll never know. No one says it aloud. No one ever does. The silence around honor is the most sacred vow of all, and by the time you are the one wearing the armor, you'll be expected to keep it too, no matter what it costs you. Death rarely comes with glory. It doesn't arrive to the sound of trumpets or in the shining moment of a noble last stand. More often, it comes quietly, unexpectedly, and without ceremony. As a squire, you start noticing how little is said about the men who don't return. There's no fanfare when a knight falls off his horse during a hunt and breaks his neck. No solemn procession when a fever grips someone in the barracks and won't let go. You see it first when a boy you trained with coughs for days and then simply doesn't wake up. The bedding is changed. The name is not mentioned again. When you march to war, the bodies are buried quickly, sometimes not at all if the ground is too hard or the time too short. You pass corpses face down in the mud, armor stolen, boots missing. No prayers, just flies. You hear men die screaming, shattered limbs, pierced lungs, groans that go on too long. There is nothing dignified about it. If you're nearby, you're expected to ignore it. If you show too much sorrow, you're told to harden up. The only time death is dressed up is when it belongs to someone important. Then there's a casket, a priest, a feast, and a dozen flattering lies spoken over the body. But most knights, like most squires, vanish without record. Their names forgotten. Their service folded into someone else's legend. You think of this often, what it means to be loyal to a system that forgets you the moment you're gone. There's no safety in rank, no immunity in bravery. You've seen men do everything right and still fall. You've seen cowards survive and sing about it later like heroes. You wonder what will be said about you when your time comes. If anything, perhaps your name will be carved in a chapel wall. Perhaps not. Perhaps the last person to say it aloud will be the stable hand who cleans your saddle. The closer you get to knighthood, the more you feel it, this weight, this hush. The realization that your body is just another piece of equipment in a larger machine. Honored when useful, discarded when broken. You train harder. You keep your armor sharp. You say your prayers. But you also begin to memorize the quiet places where a man could disappear without pain. The tucked-away chapel alcove, the silent path by the southern wall, the hill beyond the training yard where the sky opens wider. You visit them not out of fear, but out of the need to remember that you're still a person, that beneath the layers of duty, fear, and obedience, there's a soul trying not to be erased. You learn that survival isn't just about staying alive, it's about making sure you don't become one of the many who lived, served, and died, only to vanish from memory like smoke rising from a battlefield long since gone cold. You dream of one day holding your own sword, but when the day comes, it doesn't feel triumphant. It feels like debt. The blade isn't yours, not really. It's on loan, property of the Lord you serve, and you're reminded of that fact every time you clean it under supervision, every time you're told not to scuff the grip, not to stain the guard. It's heavier than you expected, not just in weight, but in consequence. You can feel it in your wrist when you swing, the bones aching from repeated drills, the bruises blossoming along your forearm when your parries fail. The sword is a burden, not a badge of honor. It must be carried everywhere, oiled, sharpened, protected from rust, watched over like a sleeping child. And yet, you're expected to be deadly with it, efficient, graceful. You're drilled constantly, slashing dummies until your arms go numb, lunging against other squires with blunted blades that still leave you limping for days. Your instructors don't offer much instruction. They demonstrate once and then expect you to learn through repetition and failure. They shout when your stance falters, strike you when your form collapses. You're taught to swing without thinking, to react without fear. But fear remains. You've seen what a real sword does to flesh. You've heard the crunch of ribs splitting under pressure, watched a man drop to the ground with one hand trying to hold his guts inside. The blade doesn't care who holds it. It only cuts. And when you hold it for too long, it begins to feel like an extension of yourself, something you're not sure you wanted to grow. Even the rituals around the sword are weighty. Before drills, you're expected to bow with it, to carry it with reverence, to speak of it as if it's sacred. Some knights name theirs, carve oaths into the steel, wrap the hilts in cloth blessed by priests. But beneath the pomp, it's still just a tool that will someday end a life. Maybe yours, maybe someone else's. You begin to dread the moments when you draw it, not because you fear the enemy, but because you fear what drawing it means, what it demands. The sword is never wielded lightly, even in jest. You keep it close, but it doesn't offer comfort. If anything, it's a constant reminder that everything you've worked for, every chore, every bruise, every sleepless night has led to this, a sharp edge in your hand and the knowledge that one day you will be ordered to use it without hesitation. You polish it nightly, watching your own reflection twist along the blade. You don't recognize the boy in it anymore. And maybe that's the point. The sword doesn't know your name. It doesn't care about your dreams. It waits quietly, patiently, until it's called upon to speak. And when it does, it speaks only in blood. Rest is not a right. It's a gamble. As a squire, sleep is something you take in fragments, when and where you can, like a thief hoarding minutes. You lie down late and rise early, always one shouted name or ringing bell away from being yanked back to your feet. Even when you're allowed a full night, the fear of being summoned mid-dream never quite lets your body relax. You sleep in your clothes, boots nearby, your cloak pulled over you like armor. Most nights, you're shoulder to shoulder with other squires, packed onto straw mattresses that smell of sweat, mildew, and something worse. There is no privacy, no space to stretch. The snoring of the others becomes a kind of white noise, broken occasionally by the grumble of a dreamer or the distant clang of a gate being locked for the night. If you wake up sore, no one cares. If you oversleep, even by a breath, you're punished. On campaign, it's worse. You sleep beneath wagons, under trees, in ditches if the wind is high and the tents are full. You wrap yourself in your cloak and hope the ground isn't too wet. You've slept with your head resting against a saddle, with a dagger clutched in your hand, not for defense, but because you were told to guard it through the night. The cold wakes you before the dawn ever does. Your joints stiffen. Your muscles protest. But rest is never deep enough to restore you. You dream in shards, vivid and strange. Broken memories of the training yard, of home, of places your body remembers even when your mind forgets. Sometimes you dream of being chased, of falling, of drowning in armor. You wake gasping and are expected to go about your duties as though nothing happened. The worst are the nights when you're summoned while half asleep, to clean up after a night's drunken return, to prepare for unexpected visitors, to stand post at a corridor you barely understand the importance of. No matter how exhausted you are, your face must remain calm, your back straight. A yawn is seen as disrespect. Fatigue is weakness. You hear stories of knights who once rode for 2 days without sleep, who held their swords through entire sieges with blood crusted in their eyes. You're expected to follow that example. When your head nods forward during Mass, the priest's cane finds your shoulder. When you stumble during drills, your knight's glare finds your spine. And still, you push forward. You walk with your head high and your limbs burning. You learn to nap standing up, to steal moments in quiet corners, to close your eyes for seconds when no one's looking. It's not enough. It's never enough. But your body adapts. It has to. Because the life you're training for offers no pause, no softness, no comfort. And one day, when you become a knight, they tell you the sleeplessness will continue. Because a knight, like a sword, is never truly at rest. In the eyes of your lord, you are expected to be silent, strong, and above all, useful. That's the quiet rule etched into every interaction, every chore, every order barked without explanation. You serve a man who holds your future in his gloved hand, but that hand can strike just as easily as it can raise you up. Your knight may be celebrated in court, praised for his skill or bravery, but when the doors close and the audience fades, he is a man like any other, flawed, impatient, often cruel. And when his frustrations rise, when the weight of command or personal shame boils over, he needs someone to absorb it. That someone is usually you. You become his vent, his shadow, his target. If his bootstrap snaps, it's your fault. If his horse resists the bit, you fitted it wrong. If he is passed over for recognition at a feast, your performance as his squire must have been lacking. The blame flows downhill, and you are always at the bottom. You learn to read his moods the way others read weather, by the tightness of his jaw, the sharpness in his walk, the silence that grows too long. You step lightly. You speak only when spoken to. And still, it isn't enough. Sometimes the punishment comes quick, a cuff to the ear, a shove against the wall. Other times, it's drawn out. Chores doubled, meals skipped. Your name hissed through gritted teeth in front of watching peers. You're not allowed to respond, not with protest, not even with a glance. The other squires see it. Some pity you, some laugh. None interfere. Everyone learns eventually that knights are men bound in pressure, and their squires are expected to take the overflow. You begin to question everything you were taught about honor. The man you follow might speak of virtue and loyalty in public, might kneel at the altar and pray with solemn eyes, but you've seen him drunk, violent, red-faced with rage. You've cleaned his vomit from the floor, covered bruises with sleeves, apologized for things you didn't do, and still, you stay. Because you have no choice. Because if you leave, there's no advancement, no knighthood, no name of your own. You serve, and in doing so, you survive. You try to remember the lessons buried beneath the abuse, that obedience is the path, that endurance is strength. But it grows harder. You find yourself bracing at every footstep behind you, flinching at the sound of his voice, pretending not to hear the muttered insults that come when he's angry or afraid. And yet, when the time comes to ride, to fight, to stand at his side, you do it, without hesitation. Not out of loyalty, but out of habit, out of necessity. You remind yourself again and again that this is the forge from which knights are made, that suffering now means authority later. But each time he strikes you and walks away unburdened, a small part of you wonders, what kind of knight am I becoming? They call it sport, but you know better. When a tournament is held and the lords and ladies gather in their bright silks to watch, they call it spectacle, celebration, chivalry in motion. But for you, for the squires and even the knights who draw lots and ready their mounts, it's violence in disguise. The lists are lined with banners and cheering crowds, but when the horn sounds and the horses charge, it's not glory that fills the air, it's impact. A lance slams into a chest, a shield splinters like firewood, a rider crashes to the ground and doesn't move. You've seen men limp for months after a joust. You've seen one squire carried off with a broken neck, but they still call it honorable. They speak of rules and decorum, but once the helm is lowered and the visor shut, no one sees what happens behind steel. Blows go too hard. Swords slip from blunted edges to bare skin. Tempers flare. A simple tilt turns into a grudge match. And blood hits the sand before anyone calls a halt. You're expected to act like it's a game, to cheer for your knight, to polish his armor until it shines, to stand tall in the dust as if you believe in the civility of it all. But your hands shake every time you strap his cuirass into place. Because if he loses, it reflects on you. If he's injured, someone will ask if you sharpened the blade correctly, if you fitted the saddle properly. There's no glory for the squire, only responsibility and punishment. When your name is drawn for the squire's melee, your turn in the ring, you don't get cheers. You get bruises. They hand you a blunt weapon and tell you not to die. You're pitted against boys who've grown desperate, boys who've been beaten down in service and now see a chance to hit back. There are no friends in that circle, just sweat and noise and fear. If you fall hard. If you win, you raise your arms as expected, even if your ribs are cracked. Then it's back to work, back to oiling the chainmail, hauling the gear, keeping the horses calm. The nobles feast while you mop blood from the tilt yard and gather shattered lances for burning. Later, you might be called to retell the events of the day, to exaggerate your night's performance, to turn a stumble into a daring feint. Everyone wants a story they can applaud. No one wants the truth, that the tournament is just another test of how much pain you can take and still stand afterward. You start to see that the line between war and play is thinner than they let on. And the worst part is, you know you'll return to that field, again and again, because in a world where honor is measured by bruises, you learn to wear yours like medals, even when no one names them. War doesn't always come with banners or bugles. Sometimes it arrives in the stink of an unwashed camp, in the dragging hours of boredom, or in the moment a cook mutters that the bread is running low. Starvation is a quieter kind of enemy, but one just as cruel. When you ride out with your knight and his retinue, you carry what you can: hardtack, smoked meat, sacks of oats, but it never lasts. The supply wagons are late or lost or stolen. The villages you pass through have already been picked clean. You watch grown men eat bark from trees, steal from one another's bowls, boil leather straps to chew something warm. You do it too. At first, you gag. Later, you're grateful. Hunger changes you. It makes your temper short and your vision narrow. It makes the cold worse and the nights longer. You dream of food, apples, sweet cakes, even the crusts you once tossed aside at feasts. When an animal is killed for meat, you don't ask what it was. You eat whatever is handed to you. You learn to ration your own stores, to hide scraps in your cloak, to barter with other squires for dried herbs or even the scent of cooked fat. Meals, when they happen, are silent. No one jokes. No one lingers. You eat with your head down and your eyes watching for the next portion. And then there's the guilt, when you eat and someone else goes without. When your knight gets a full plate and passes none of it to his retinue. When the camp children beg at the perimeter and you're ordered to turn them away. You obey, but the image stays with you. Bones visible through skin. Eyes too large for their faces. You begin to understand that hunger isn't just a matter of food, it's a matter of power. The well-fed are obeyed. The starving are forgotten. Even among your fellow squires, it becomes a silent competition. Who has the most? Who has hidden a little extra? You start lying to friends, hoarding morsels in your bedding, mistrusting everyone. Hunger is corrosive. It eats your strength and your faith at the same pace. It turns oaths into ashes. And yet no one complains. To admit you're starving is to admit you're weak. So you keep your voice steady and your belt tightened. You swing your sword with less force each day, but you keep swinging. Because if you fall behind, if your legs give out, if your stomach growls at the wrong moment, someone else will take your place. You don't want to be left behind. You don't want to be forgotten. So you endure it, as knights and squires have endured for generations. You learn that chivalry offers no nourishment, and that the stories of noble warriors dining in victory leave out the truth, that most of knighthood is hunger. Hunger for food, for rest, for meaning. And some days you forget which one you miss most. Brotherhood is carved into the idea of knighthood, but in truth, It's far more fragile than the songs would have you believe. You're told you fight beside your equals, that the man in the next set of armor is your comrade, your kin in steel. But when the food runs low, or a lord's favor is on the line, or someone needs to be blamed for a mistake, that same man will turn on you without hesitation. Loyalty among squires and knights is conditional, earned in small, careful gestures, and easily shattered by ambition. You remember the first time someone you trusted stepped away when your name was called for punishment. The silence said more than any words could. You begin to measure people by how they act when no one's watching. Some you trust to share a fire, a story, a crust of bread. Others you watch warily, knowing they'd see you fall just to climb a little higher. The camaraderie that does form is built on hardship, not honor. It's forged in late-night watches when the campfire burns low and your hands shake from cold. In glances exchanged during drills, when your ribs are bruised and your patience thinner than your boots. It's quiet, wordless, more about presence than promises. You don't speak of your fears, but you know who'd share their water if yours ran dry. You don't confess your doubts, but you know who would fight beside you when the horn sounds. That's as close to brotherhood as most ever get. And still, that fragile trust can crack. You've seen boys whisper lies to curry favor, seen squires sabotage each other's gear, seen rivalries boil over into brawls behind the stables. There's no room for weakness in the hierarchy, and everyone's afraid of slipping. So instead of lifting each other up, many keep their heads down and their knives ready. And yet, in rare moments, something real breaks through. A shared joke that makes you laugh so hard your sides ache. A hand on your shoulder when your knight berates you in front of the others. A cloak thrown over your back when you're shivering in the pre-dawn frost. These moments stay with you, etched deeper than scars. They remind you that beneath the iron, beneath the obedience, you're still human. But those bonds are always temporary. Men change when they're knighted. The squire who once split an apple with you might now walk past you like he doesn't remember your face. You watch the transformation happen, how respect hardens into pride, how friendship gives way to formality. And you wonder if it will happen to you. If, when your turn comes, you'll forget the boys you bled beside, the nights you whispered plans to escape, the mornings you woke shoulder to shoulder, aching and half frozen, but still alive. You want to believe you'll remember, that you'll be different. But in a world where survival often means stepping over someone else's body, even the best intentions have a way of disappearing beneath the armor. Your armor protects you from blades, but nothing shields you from winter. When the cold comes, it wraps around the castle like a second skin, creeping into the stone walls, curling into the straw pallets, freezing the breath in your lungs before you've even opened your eyes. You wake with your limbs stiff and slow, your joints aching from nights spent curled against yourself beneath a damp cloak. There is no fire for squires. The hearths in the great hall burn for the nobles, the knights, the guests. You huddle near the kitchens if you're lucky, warming your hands over the ash and pretending it helps. Everything is harder in winter. Training, chores, even breathing. The water you fetch is half frozen, and you still must carry it up slippery stairs. Your hands crack open from the cold, and the bandages you wrap them with freeze solid before midday. You scrub armor that's like touching ice, polish steel until your knuckles bleed, and still the masters bark that it isn't good enough. The stables are warmer than the barracks, but the reek is overwhelming, and the horses grow restless when they're penned up for days. You muck their stalls anyway, fingers numb, eyes watering from the stench. There's no escape from the wind. It whips through every window, every gap in the wall, rattling shutters and turning candle flames into nervous flickers. At night, you lie beside other squires, all of you wrapped in cloaks and rags, pressed together not from camaraderie, but survival. You sleep in layers, but still wake shivering. Some boys cough, until their ribs ache. You've seen more than one dragged from the barracks before dawn and carried to the chapel to be buried before lunch. Illness moves fast. No one talks about it. You wrap scarves over your nose, avoid sharing bowls, say quiet prayers beneath your breath. It doesn't help. The cold has no mercy. Food grows scarcer. Salted meat, hard bread, stale grain. The stew tastes like boiled cloth, but you eat every bite. You pretend it fills you. You smile when others make jokes, but your body aches for something hot, something sweet, something soft. You don't remember what that even feels like. The nights carry on as if nothing has changed, striding through the courtyards with thick cloaks and fur-lined boots, their armor gleaming while your tunic sticks to your skin with sweat frozen beneath it. They barely notice you shivering behind them, carrying their swords, buckling their straps with fingers that can hardly feel the buckles. And yet, you endure. Not because you're strong, not because you're noble, but because you have no choice. Because if you falter, someone else will take your place. The castle does not pause for the cold, and neither can you. You learn that knighthood demands not just strength of arms, but strength of will, especially when the world around you turns white, silent, and cruel. Winter does not make a knight, but it reveals who can become one. You're taught to see the enemy as less than you, less civilized, less devout, less noble. But when you finally face them across a field or within a burning village, the illusion begins to crack. They don't look like monsters. They look like men. Men with frightened eyes and hands that tremble just like yours. Some are young, too young. Others are older than your knight, and you wonder what brought them here, what promises they were given. You were told you'd fight for honor, but no one ever clearly explained what that meant. And as you ride into a hamlet under orders, sword in hand, torch in the other, you begin to question who the enemy really is. You watch houses burn, you see families flee, clutching whatever they can carry, and the smoke stings your eyes, not from the fire, but from something else. You're ordered to seize grain, to drive livestock back toward the wagons, to teach a lesson. You do as you're told. You always do. You keep your head down while peasants beg in a language you barely understand. You step over old men curled around children. Your stomach knots, but you say nothing. Because this is the duty they prepared you for. Because your knight is watching. You think of the sermons in the chapel, the ones about justice and mercy, and then you remember the punishment dealt to a squire who once dared speak against an order. He was stripped of his title, sent back to his village like a failure, like a stain. You keep your silence. You swing your blade when commanded. You march with your unit across fields that used to be wheat and are now trampled mud. There's no glory here, just orders, just fire. And when night comes, and the camp settles, and the looted goods are divided among the knights, you sit near the edge of it all, too tired to sleep, too awake to forget what you saw. The older men drink and laugh. They speak of strategy and victory as though the people who once lived in those huts weren't real. You wrap your cloak tighter, stare into the flames, and try not to think about the woman who screamed when you took her last bag of flour. The worst part is how quickly it becomes normal, how numbness slides in like a shield, how your mind begins to accept what your heart once rejected. You tell yourself you had no choice, that it was them or you, that someone else would have done worse. And maybe all of that is true. But the next time you ride into another village, you won't hesitate, and you'll hate yourself a little less for it. That's the real lesson they never wrote into the code of chivalry. Not how to fight, not how to serve, but how to live with what you've done, and how to keep your hands steady, even when they're stained. Siege warfare strips away every illusion of heroism you've ever carried. It's not fast. It's not glorious. It's a long, drawn-out dance with starvation sickness, and silence. When you arrive at a besieged castle, or worse, become trapped inside one, you quickly realize that the enemy is not just across the moat, but inside your own ranks. Hunger breeds suspicion, boredom breeds cruelty, days blur into one another, and the only sounds are the groaning of trebuchets, the thud of stones against walls, the occasional whistle of an arrow finding someone unlucky. You're ordered to help reinforce defenses, hauling stones and timber until your shoulders ache and your hands bleed. Then you're handed a bow or a spear and told to stand at the wall for hours, staring across no man's land, wondering when the next volley will come. Sometimes nothing happens for days. Other times, an entire section of the wall explodes in dust and screams. The injured don't cry for long. Infection sets in fast. The medics, if you're lucky enough to have one, are overwhelmed. Some wounds are too messy to clean, so they're cauterized on the spot. You smell flesh burning like meat over fire, and the scent doesn't leave your nose for days. Inside the walls, supplies dwindle. The bread becomes thinner. The meat vanishes. Eventually, you're chewing on boiled leather and pretending it's enough. You drink rainwater, or worse. Rats become both plague and prey. The nobles still eat better than you. You watch them slip into the great hall for private meals, while the rest of the garrison licks the bottom of the stew pot. You never forget that hierarchy survives even when everything else collapses. At night, the cold creeps in, and you sleep with one eye open, listening for ladders against the walls, for footsteps too close. When the siege drags on long enough, morale breaks. You see men weep openly, others go silent and stare at nothing. One squire jumps from the battlements. You're told not to speak of it. The worst is the waiting. Weeks with nothing to do but rot in your own armor. Feel your skin blister beneath metal you can't take off in case of sudden attack. You begin to question the purpose of it all. What did this town do? What does this fortress hold that justifies so much suffering? But those questions are above your station. You are told only to endure, to hold, to serve. If you're lucky, the siege ends with surrender. If you're not, it ends in fire. You may be ordered to join the breach, to storm over rubble and bodies, to cut through men who barely have the strength to stand. And when it's over, when the walls fall and the flag changes, nothing feels won. You clean your sword, gather your gear, and march to the next place. That's the truth of a knight's duty in a siege. It's not victory. It's surviving the slow unraveling of everything around you and learning not to break with it. There's a particular kind of shame that settles in when you realize the people you're supposed to protect fear you more than they respect you. You see it in the way peasants avert their eyes when your knight rides past, or the way mothers pull their children behind them when you approach. They don't see you as noble. They see a threat in armor. You are a symbol of law, but not justice, of order, but not safety. When you're sent to collect taxes or escort a caravan, you see the way farmers hesitate to speak, unsure if your presence means protection or punishment. You weren't trained for this part. The code of chivalry says knights should be virtuous, merciful, defenders of the weak, but the world doesn't operate on parchment ideals. The truth is, many knights treat villages like their personal hunting grounds. A few words from your lord, a bad mood, a spilled cup of wine, and suddenly, the entire hamlet is held to account. You're ordered to carry out justice that feels more like revenge. A man's grain is taken because his cousin fled conscription. A family's oxen are seized because they failed to pay a tax, no one told them about. You stand there as the children cry and the old beg for mercy. Sometimes you want to intervene, to speak, to do something, but you don't, because your job is not to question, it's to obey. If you speak out, you're disloyal. If you act on your conscience, you're removed from service. So you keep your mouth shut and tighten the girth strap on your knight's horse. It's easier when you don't look people in the eye. Easier still when you convince yourself that you're only following orders. You tell yourself that maybe, once you're knighted, you'll do things differently. You'll be the good one, the one they write songs about. But deep down, you know how rare that is. The system rewards obedience, not morality. You've seen squires punished for kindness, overlooked for promotions because they hesitated during raids, dismissed for showing pity where none was ordered. So you learn the same lesson every night before you learned: how to be feared without becoming cruel, how to carry out orders without letting them rot your soul. You start to recognize the mask you wear, the straight back, the unreadable face, the rehearsed voice. You wear it like you wear your armor, heavy but necessary. And over time, it hardens. There are still moments that break through: a whispered thank you from someone you helped, a smile from a child too young to know what you represent. But they're rare. Most days, you're greeted with silence. You ride past fields and faces without being welcomed. And you wonder, not for the first time, what kind of protector has to be feared to be respected? What kind of honor demands distance instead of dignity? And what, if anything, will be left of you once the mask becomes your face? When you're ordered to carry a banner into battle, it feels like an honor, until you realize it makes you a target. The cloth is heavy with meaning, embroidered with the crest of your lord, the legacy of his house, the stories he tells to other nobles when wine has dulled their memory. But to the enemy, it's just a mark that says, "Strike here." You carry it high, trying to keep your arm steady, even as the wind snaps it like a whip and arrows hiss past. Your shield hand is free, but your sword hand is now burdened, and suddenly your purpose isn't to fight, but to be seen. You are told the banner inspires courage, steadies men, signals the living presence of leadership on the field. But no one tells you how to hold that courage when you're standing in open ground, half a step ahead of the line, praying the fabric above your head doesn't lead death straight to your chest. The pole vibrates with tension as battle roars around you. The clash of weapons, the cries of the wounded, the dull thud of men hitting the ground. It all blurs into a storm of color and sound. But still, you must not drop the banner. To lower it is to signal defeat. To let it fall is to invite shame. So you plant your feet, grit your teeth, and bear the weight of both fabric and expectation. When your knight rides past, you see his eyes flick up toward the banner, not toward you. You are invisible beneath the symbol, and yet, if the banner survives, the battle is remembered. If it falls, you are blamed. You've seen what happens when one goes down. The line buckles. Morale cracks. The knights curse the squire who let it happen, no matter how many arrows he took to the chest. There's no glory in dying with it, only the expectation that someone else will pick it up. You've heard the songs, how noble men retrieved fallen standards from bloodied fields, raising them high again in defiance. But they never mention the ones who died first, whose bodies are trampled under horses and forgotten in the telling. At night, when the battlefield quiets and the wounded moan like ghosts, you're the one who folds the banner back into its case, your hands shaking. You wipe blood from the cloth, sometimes yours, sometimes others. You straighten the fabric, remove the dirt, and make it look untouched, like nothing happened, like it was all ceremony and honor. You realize then that the banner doesn't care who held it. It will fly over any shoulder, whether brave or trembling. And when it's raised again tomorrow, no one will speak of how scared you were. only that the flag never dropped, that the colors held, that the knight's crest remained visible, even as you bled beneath it. Injury isn't a matter of if, it's when. As a knight, or even as a squire in the shadow of one, pain is the one thing you come to count on. You get used to the bruises first, the small ones, the welts from practiced swords, the stinging cuts from your own carelessness. You laugh them off at first. They become part of your morning inspection, a collection of aches cataloged like old friends. But then comes the deeper wound, the one that doesn't stop bleeding, the one that makes your limbs go cold and your breath shallow. That's when the fear hits. Not from the pain itself, but from knowing there's little anyone can do. There are no real doctors on the field. Just a camp follower with a dull knife, a bit of wine, and a prayer muttered under their breath. They press rags into wounds and hope for the best. Infection is the real killer. A scratch today could mean a fever tomorrow, and death before the week is done. The lucky ones are treated quickly, the flesh cauterized with iron, the wound bound tight with linen that may or may not be clean. The unlucky ones are left behind. There's no room for the weak on a long march. If you can't ride, you slow the column, and no one wants to carry a dead weight. So you bite your tongue when the pain hits. You splint your own fingers. You walk on twisted ankles. You lie through your teeth and say you're fine. Because to admit you're not is to invite replacement to fade into memory. Some knights carry their scars like trophies. They boast of missing fingers, shattered ribs, old arrowheads still buried beneath the skin. But behind the bravado, you see the truth. The way their hands tremble, the way they wince when the weather turns, the way they avoid the healer's tent, not because they're brave, but because they're afraid of what it means to go back. Recovery isn't rest, it's agony, laying still while muscles waste away. Listening to your comrades train and march without you, feeling forgotten. When the fever breaks, if it breaks, you return weaker, slower, and everyone notices. You're tested immediately, thrown back into drills, expected to keep pace or fall out for good. No grace, no compassion, just the expectation that you'll fight through it or die trying. And if the wound never quite heals, if your shoulder pulls the wrong way, or your grip never fully returns, no one makes room for that. You simply learn to adapt, to fight around the pain, to live with the limp. In knighthood, injury isn't a setback, it's a silent branding. A reminder that the body will fail long before the duty ends. And yet, you press on. Because beneath the scars, beneath the broken parts of you, lies the unspoken truth. Pain is the only part of this life that doesn't lie. It demands nothing, and it gives nothing. But it stays, always. The stories always mention honor, but they never mention rot. Not in the walls, not in the wounds, not in the soul. You learn early that castles are not pristine places of gleaming stone and echoing halls. They're damp, cold, and full of decay. The same can be said for the ideals you were promised. As you rise through the ranks, you begin to see how quickly chivalry bends under the weight of self-interest. Nobles squabble over land while men bleed for their banners. Treaties are made, then broken without notice. A handshake today becomes a battlefield tomorrow. You ride under one lord's crest, only to be told next season that he's now your enemy because someone higher up married into a different family. Nothing stays true for long. Not allegiance, not law, not even faith. You attend masses before battles, hear sermons on God's favor and divine cause, only to witness atrocities committed under those same holy banners. A chapel is looted for gold chalices. its altar used as a table for a knight's supper. Priests blessed swords used to kill farmers who couldn't pay a tax they never agreed to. And you're told it's righteous, that this is the will of God. You nod along. What else can you do? Question it, and you're labeled a heretic or worse, a traitor. The rot isn't just outside you, it gets inside you too. The longer you serve, the more you start making excuses. You justify cruelty with duty. You accept injustice as necessary. You start to laugh at things that once made you uncomfortable. And when someone younger asks you why things are the way they are, you say, "That's just how it is." You become the echo of the system that wounded you, the same one you swore you'd challenge when you were still new, still clean, still foolish. Some knights try to hold on to their ideals. They write poems. They act with restraint. They refuse to raid villages or abuse their titles. But they don't last. Their names fade. Their stories go untold. Because virtue, while beautiful, isn't useful to those in power. You survive not by being noble, but by knowing when to bow your head and when to draw your sword. And sometimes, the hardest thing to do is admit that you're tired of pretending it means something. You try to remember why you wanted this life in the first place. Maybe it was the stories. Maybe it was your father's pride. Maybe it was the only path you were ever offered. But now, you're here, armored, respected, feared, and still, something in you feels empty. Like you traded something essential for this title, and you're not even sure when it happened. The rot is everywhere. In the halls, in the orders, in the silence after the killing stops. And yet you keep writing. Because to stop is to admit it's won. And even if the code is broken, even if the stories were lies, you still cling to the smallest hope that something within you can remain whole. A knight's glory is loud, but his death is often quiet. You don't die in a blaze of honor with trumpets sounding and a clean sword strike to the chest. You die coughing in a straw bed with no one to remember your name. Or you die in the mud, beneath a horse, your armor too twisted to remove before your last breath. Sometimes you die after the battle, long after the songs are sung and the banners have been taken down. Infection, fever, wounds that fester in the silence of a forgotten camp. There is no fanfare for that, no mourning, just the grim shuffle of someone stripping your gear and passing it to the next in line. If you're lucky, someone buries you. If you're not, the crows do the work. Knights aren't built to last. Armor wears down the body, just as war does the spirit. The weight that once made you feel invincible begins to gnaw at your spine, your knees, your sense of balance. You age faster. The strong become stiff. The fast become brittle. And the pages you once barked at now look at you with something close to pity. Retirement isn't romantic. If you're noble-born and favored, you might live out your days managing an estate or offering dull advice at court. But even then, you're a relic, a worn-out symbol of someone else's war. If you're landless, you have fewer choices. Some knights become mercenaries, their code traded for coin. Others fade into the ranks of monastery lay brothers, scrubbing floors and praying through pain. A few drink themselves into silence. They say you die twice, once in the flesh and again when no one remembers you. For many knights, that second death comes sooner. Your victories are recorded under another man's name. Your service folded into the legacy of a lord who never once lifted a sword. You look back and wonder what it was all for. The blisters, the blood, the brutal nights on campaign. The years of silence where you swallowed pain so others could speak. And you realize there's no clear answer. Just a long list of things you've lost in the name of a title. People remember the idea of a knight, not the man inside the armor. The steel shines. the stories echo, but the bones beneath rust quietly. And in the end, whether you're buried in a churchyard or forgotten in an unmarked trench, your name fades just the same. That's the final truth of knighthood. Not everyone gets a legend. Not everyone earns a song. Most are simply used, then replaced. And the only thing that lingers is the sound of hooves riding away from the battlefield, leaving behind a silence that no banner can fill. The oath is supposed to mean everything. It binds you to your Lord, to your land, to your faith. It is spoken aloud, with hands on steel or scripture, eyes lowered in reverence. But over time, you begin to feel how hollow those words become. You swore to protect the weak, to serve with honor, to uphold justice. But the longer you wear your armor, the more you realize how little room there is for any of that. Your oath is used like a leash, pulled taut whenever you hesitate or question. You swore, they say, as if that alone justifies the cruelty you're ordered to carry out. You swore as if obedience is the only virtue. You remember the first time you broke your oath. It wasn't dramatic, just a moment when your conscience twitched and your body refused to move. A boy, no older than you were when you first carried a sword, begging at the edge of a razed village. You had orders to clear the area, but you let him go. And no one noticed. No one punished you. But something shifted inside. You realized how easy it was to bend the code without anyone knowing, and how quickly that became a pattern. The line between duty and damage blurred. You began to justify actions by silence, to carry out tasks you didn't believe in because the alternative meant losing everything you'd worked for. The title, the rank, the fragile respect of those above you. You told yourself it was survival, but at night, when the world grew still and your armor rested beside your bedroll, you wondered if that survival was worth what it cost. Knights are meant to be paragons, beacons of morality wrapped in steel. But the truth is, most of them are just men trying to navigate a world that punishes kindness and rewards control. You see men twist the oath into whatever shape fits their ambition. One knight justifies his cruelty as order. Another calls his greed stewardship. You hear them mock those who still believe in chivalry, calling them naive. Eventually, you learn that upholding the oath, truly living it, often means standing alone. And that is a dangerous place to be, because lords want loyalty, not integrity. They want results, not principles. You find yourself nodding when you should object, writing out when you should protest, holding the line when everything in your soul tells you it's wrong. The oath becomes a shell, still visible, still recited, but hollow inside. You begin to envy the squires who haven't yet been broken by it, who still think the code means something. And you wonder if there's a way to return to that place, that ideal. But the road back is narrow, and knights who take it rarely stay knights for long. In the end, you keep the oath on your lips, but not in your hands. You speak it like a prayer you've stopped believing in, because in a world built on power, honor is not the armor that protects you, it's the weight that drags you down. Winter doesn't care about your armor. It seeps through the joints, gnaws at your bones, and makes every breath a struggle. The cold turns your sword hands stiff and your fingers blue beneath their gauntlets. Snow gathers in your boots, not just outside, but inside, melting only slightly with your body heat before freezing again into cruel edges that cut as you march. You were trained for battle, but no one taught you how to fight the season. There are no enemies to charge, only the relentless, silent hunger of cold that grinds down your spirit with every hour. The castle feels less like a stronghold and more like a stone cage. The walls do little to keep the wind out, and your breath becomes visible, curling like ghost trails in the dim candlelight. You sleep in your armor some nights, not for readiness, but for warmth. Blankets are scarce, firewood scarcer, and rank determines who gets to warm their hands by the hearth. As a lower knight, you're near the bottom of that ladder. You huddle close to the embers when you can, but most nights are spent trying not to shiver audibly, lest someone mistake it for weakness. Food loses its appeal. Everything is dried or salted beyond recognition. You chew because you must, not because you want to. And when the supplies dwindle, meals are stretched thin. Bread with more air than grain, broth more bone than meat. The hunger creeps in, slow and patient, until it's all you think about. Training becomes treacherous. The frozen ground turns to ice beneath your feet, and one slip can crack ribs or snap a wrist. But drills continue because war doesn't pause for winter, and neither do expectations. You spar with numb limbs, eyes watering from the wind, praying not to make a mistake your body can't afford to correct. And still, somehow, the worst part isn't the cold or the hunger or the bruises. It's the silence. Winter quiets everything. No birds, no travelers, no news. The stillness wraps around the castle like a shroud. The men grow irritable, then withdrawn. Jokes dry up. Laughter feels out of place. You find yourself staring into the snow, imagining what spring might feel like, and wondering if you'll live long enough to see it. You begin to understand why knights drink more in the winter, why some disappear into prayer or madness. The cold peels you back layer by layer until what's left is something raw and strangely honest. There are no illusions in the frost, no songs of glory, just endurance, just getting through another night without frostbite or fever, just surviving until the thaw. And when the sun finally returns, when the snow begins to melt and color seeps back into the world, it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like relief. Because winter didn't defeat you, but it certainly tried. And in some small, aching way, you know it always will again. For all the weight they place on loyalty, a knight's place is never secure. One wrong word, one failed order, one shift in noble favor, and you're no longer a shield, but a liability. The higher you rise, the sharper the knives behind your back. Politics is a game played behind velvet curtains, and no amount of armor can protect you from whispers. You train to face swords, but not smiles that hide betrayal. Your allegiance is sworn to a single lord, but his enemies might be your friends tomorrow, or your masters. You see men stripped of their spurs, not for cowardice, but for falling out of favor. You watch as knights are accused of treason with no evidence, only rumor. One disappears after voicing concerns about a campaign's cost. Another is sent to an unwinnable battle and never returns. No one says it aloud, but everyone knows. Fail once, and they'll bury your legacy with your body. You try to stay useful, but not too ambitious. Respectable, but never threatening. It's a balancing act, and it never ends. You attend feasts where the wine flows and laughter dances through torchlight. But the conversations are traps. A single careless comment, a misjudged glance, and suddenly you're on the outside looking in. The younger squires think the danger lies on the battlefield. You know better. The real peril lies in proximity to power. Every court is a nest of agendas wrapped in courtesy. You stand post behind your lord, listening as alliances are made over meat and honeyed pears, each word chosen as carefully as a dagger's angle. You see knights flatter men they hate, kneel to lords who spat on them the year before. You learn the value of silence, of nodding without agreement, of feigning ignorance when asked for opinions. And even then, it might not be enough. Your bloodline, your accent, the village you came from, all can be twisted into suspicion if someone with influence needs you gone. Loyalty is not a shield, it is a test. Continuous, cruel, and often impossible to pass. You wonder how many noble deaths were truly in battle and how many were arranged. You hear stories of poisoned goblets, of hunting accidents, of sudden illnesses that only strike those who stood in the way. You stop laughing at those stories because eventually you know someone it happened to. Maybe it happens to you. You sleep with your knife close, not just for enemies, but for those you dine with. And as time goes on, you realize there's no victory in the court, only survival. The real code of knighthood isn't chivalry, it's discretion. It's learning to serve without being seen, to influence without leaving a mark. And when you fail at that, when you become too visible, too honest, too strong, they'll remind you how replaceable even the finest knight can be. Not with a battle, not with a trial, but with silence and absence and the slow erasure of your name from every story ever told. Somewhere along the way, your own name starts to feel like someone else's. You're referred to more often by title than self. Sir, knight, retainer, words that sound impressive but hollow after enough repetition. You become a tool in someone else's legend, a loyal blade wielded by men whose power shields them from every risk you're expected to endure. Your identity fades behind heraldry and ritual. No one asks what you think or what you fear. They ask if you're ready, if your sword is sharp, if your oath is intact. When you walk through the great hall, servants step aside, not because they know you, but because of what you represent. You could be anyone in that armor, anyone willing to bend their neck and spill blood for the right cause. Your achievements are attached to other names. You win battles for your lord. You protect the heirs of a family that barely remembers your first campaign. You carve your life into the margins of theirs. And when they tell stories at feasts, your deeds are summarized in a sentence. He held the line. He rode through fire. He served with honor. But the cold, the blood, the fear, the losses you carry in silence, they're yours alone. The world sees the crest on your shield, not the man beneath it. You try to hold on to pieces of yourself in the quiet spaces, your memories of childhood, a carved token hidden in your satchel, the sound of your mother's voice in prayer. But even those begin to feel distant, worn down by the endless march of service. The longer you live this life, the more you begin to vanish inside it. You smile less, speak less. Your dreams narrow to survival, your hopes trimmed into obedience. You begin to envy the peasants, the craftsmen, even the beggars, because at least they are allowed to be themselves, however hard their lives may be. You are armor that walks, a sword that bows, a name that echoes someone else's glory. And yet, when you try to imagine leaving, hanging up the sword, laying down the shield, there is nothing waiting for you. The life you had before knighthood has dissolved. The person you once were is unreachable. So you keep going, not because of faith or pride or hope, but because there's no other path left. You do what's asked. You bear the weight. You endure. And when people look at you, they see strength, discipline, resolve. They don't see the man inside the metal, the one quietly wondering if he'll ever be remembered for anything more than the silence he kept. You understand now why old knights speak so little. It's not wisdom, it's grief. Grief for the self that was buried long before the body followed. And in that silence, you find your own reflection, sharp, hidden, and slowly fading with every step you take toward whatever comes next. You grow used to the sound of other men dying. The screams don't haunt you like they once did. They become part of the rhythm of your days, like the clatter of hooves or the clang of steel. At first, you try to remember each face. Comrades lost in skirmishes, squires too young to bleed out in the mud, knights who laughed beside you the night before they vanished beneath a hail of arrows. But eventually, they blur. You stop asking names. You stop counting. There's no time for mourning on campaign. If a man falls, Someone else takes his place. A cloak covers the body until the scavengers do the rest. The only graves are shallow, dug in haste before the next march. You don't talk about the ones who didn't make it, not because you don't care, but because you've learned that caring openly is dangerous. It makes you slow, hesitant, and hesitation is death. So you harden, you say the prayer, you tighten your belt, you move forward, but the weight doesn't go away. It just moves inward. You carry the dead with you, silently, in the creases of your hands, in the way your eyes linger too long on the empty places around the fire. The worst deaths are the stupid ones. The knight who trips into a ditch during a retreat. The squire crushed under a collapsing siege tower. The man who drinks bad water because no one thought to check the well. These aren't tales for the bard's song. They're reminders that no amount of training or courage can outpace bad luck. You begin to sense when it's coming. There's a silence before it, a strange stillness. Sometimes it's in the way a man looks at the horizon too long. Sometimes it's in the last laugh he gives, too sharp, too final. You can't explain it, but you feel it. You want to say something, warn him, stop him, but you never do. Because how do you tell someone their time is up when you're not even sure your own hasn't already passed? And then one day, someone says your name in that hushed, pitied tone. You've taken a wound. You're laid up, wrapped in linen, watching the world blur around you. It's not mortal, at least not yet. But it's enough to make you still. And in that stillness, you wonder if this is where it ends. You wonder if someone will remember your name in 10 years. In one. You wonder if the knight you served will mention you to the next boy he trains, or if you'll be another lesson buried in silence. You survive this time, but the line feels thinner now, the ground colder. You return to the ranks with a limp and fewer illusions, and though no one says it aloud, they look at you differently, not like a hero, not like a knight, but like a man who's been marked. By chance, by fate, by the quiet hand of death, always brushing close, never quite letting go. The banners look impressive from afar. Bright colors, fierce animals, ancient mottos stitched in gold. But up close, they're just cloth, stained with smoke, torn at the edges, flapping like wounded things in the wind. And that's the truth of most symbols in a knight's life. They're meant to inspire loyalty, to command fear, to remind everyone of the power behind them. But when you're the one holding the line beneath that flag, they feel less like honor and more like burden. You ride into battle beneath a crest that might not even be yours, carrying the weight of a name that demands sacrifice without knowing your face. The people cheering at parades don't see the man behind the visor. They see the house you serve. Your own story gets swallowed in someone else's narrative. That lion on your tabard, it represents a lineage you're not part of. That dragon you wear into combat, it's someone else's vengeance. You become a walking emblem, a mobile myth, expected to uphold traditions you never agreed to and die for men you've never spoken to. And worse, you're not allowed to question it. Not openly, not without risking your place, your future, your neck. You tell yourself it's noble, that the system needs order, that crests and titles give shape to the chaos. But in private, you feel the absurdity gnawing at you. You clean your armor while a noble child plays with a wooden sword, already calling himself a knight, though he's never tasted blood or heard a man scream. You polish the sigils of lords who claim virtue while scheming to outmaneuver each other for land, marriages, gold. Every color on that banner has cost someone something, usually their life. And yet, when you ride, you still raise it high. Because not doing so would mark you as disloyal, and that's a death sentence of a different kind. The battlefield is a stage, and your banner is your script. You wave it even as arrows rain down, even as comrades fall beside you, because turning back would dishonor the crest, even if the crest has already dishonored itself 100 times over. And when you win, when the dust clears and your side stands triumphant, the banner is raised over broken bodies like a trophy. You're told it was worth it, that you've added glory to your name, even if your name is never spoken. But in the quiet that follows, when the celebration fades and the dead are carted away, you wonder what any of it truly meant. A piece of fabric, a borrowed symbol, a duty to something that never bled for you. You tuck it away again, fold it with practiced hands, knowing you'll raise it tomorrow. Not because you believe in it, but because you don't know how to live without it. And maybe, just maybe, you fear what would happen if you ever laid it down for good. They always say a knight lives by the sword. What they don't say is how much of that life is spent simply waiting with it. You spend far more time standing still than charging into glory. Hours posted at gates, staring at the same patch of forest or road, waiting for messengers who never come or enemies who never arrive. You're stationed in the rain, in the heat, in the dark. The sword at your side is heavy and unneeded, but you must keep it close, always. You shift your weight. You count breaths. You listen for footsteps that might never fall. Guard duty is the least romantic part of knighthood and the most frequent. You are not a hero during those stretches. You're a statue with sore feet, and yet you're expected to be alert, to notice every shadow, every movement, every threat. Your eyes burn from trying not to blink too long. Your legs ache from hours of stillness. You learn to nap standing up, to hear through layers of exhaustion. The punishment for slipping is swift and cruel. A knight once fell asleep at the wall and was beaten so badly he couldn't lift his sword for a week. You never forget that. And so you stand and wait. There are longer kinds of waiting too. Waiting for battle, for summons, for recognition. For some, it's waiting for permission to marry, or to return home, or to retire. For others, it's waiting for an injury to heal, or for the right to train again. Time moves strangely in this life. Days can stretch endlessly, and yet years disappear behind you like dust in wind. You wake up one day and realize you're 10 winters older and not much closer to the thing you thought you were chasing. The hardest waiting is internal. The waiting for something to change, for the system to shift, for the wars to end, for peace to finally mean something. But peace is rare, and change comes slowly, if at all. Most of what you guard never needed guarding. Most of the battles you wait for never happen. But that doesn't mean they're not coming. You're taught to expect them always, to hold your breath through the quiet, to fear stillness as much as chaos. Some knights lose their minds in the waiting. They begin to see threats where there are none. Shadows become enemies. Every stranger becomes a spy. They sharpen their blades obsessively, polish armor that doesn't need it, rehearse battles that never come, because waiting feels like rust, and rust feels like death. Others go the opposite way. They stop caring. They drift through their duties with hollow eyes, armor unkempt, eyes glazed. Neither path is safe. Both lead to ruin. And so you try to balance. You stand. You wait. You endure the emptiness between commands. And you learn the cruel truth of the knight's life. The sword is not just a tool for battle. It's a weight you carry through silence, through stillness, through all the days when nothing happens, except the slow wearing away of who you used to be. The worst wounds aren't from swords. They're from people, trusted ones, who turn their backs when you need them most. As a knight, betrayal is a lesson taught early, though rarely in words. You see it in the squire who blames you for his own failure, in the lord who promises rewards that never arrive, in the brother in arms who swears loyalty but rides off when the odds turn grim. You're trained to expect pain from enemies, but not from allies. And when it comes, it guts you in places armor can't reach. There are no rules of honor in politics, no safeguards against ambition wrapped in smiles. You're expected to serve and sacrifice, but loyalty is a currency that others spend freely and never repay. You watch as younger knights, better connected or born of higher blood, receive promotions you've bled to deserve. You stand by while the whispering circles tighten, decisions made in candlelit corners by men who've never seen a battlefield. You play the game as best you can, silent, obedient, durable, but it's never enough. Because the truth is, you're disposable, revered when useful, discarded when inconvenient. One winter, you return from a border campaign, limping, exhausted, having lost half your company, only to find that your holdings have been reassigned, your name omitted from the victory scrolls, and your efforts dismissed as minor. No one meets your eyes. The steward tells you gently that a noble son was sent in your place for the next charge. It's better for appearances, he says. You nod. What else can you do? Rage changes nothing. Justice is a rare guest in these halls, and so you swallow the humiliation again. That night, as you unbuckle your battered armor and stare into the fire, you realize you've grown used to the taste of being overlooked. You think of comrades who died under your command, names that live only in your memory. You think of the promises made, titles, lands, glory, all melted down into silence. You remind yourself you didn't choose this life for reward, but the bitterness still settles in your gut like stone. You try not to become like the others, those hollowed-out knights who drink too deeply and speak in growls, men twisted by betrayal into something cynical and cruel. But it's hard. Every slight cuts deeper than the last. You begin to trust less, speak less, smile less. Even the innocent gestures feel suspicious now. A shared joke, a handshake, an invitation. You wonder if anything is given freely anymore. You wonder if it ever was. The next time you ride out, you look at the men beside you and ask yourself which one will abandon you, which one will thrive in your absence, which one will twist the tale to their advantage. This is the lesson knighthood teaches you in time. Not how to fight with honor, but how to survive without illusion. And in the end, you learn to carry not just your sword, but your silence. Because in a world built on betrayal, the quiet ones last the longest. Every knight remembers the first time they killed a man, not in training, not in sport, but truly on a field where the soil was wet with blood and the air stank of iron and sweat. It doesn't happen like in the songs. There's no slow motion, no noble duel, no final words exchanged with dignity. It's frantic, clumsy, desperate. The man you face is scared. So are you. Neither of you wants to die, and yet one of you will. Your heart pounds so loudly you can barely hear. Your grip slips from sweat or rain, or both. Then a moment. An opening, a mistake, and it happens. A thrust, a scream, a jolt. And suddenly he's not standing anymore. You don't feel triumph. You feel nausea. You feel time slow as you stare at what's left and wonder how you became the thing that ended another life. They tell you that killing is part of the duty, that knights must be prepared to do what others cannot. But no one truly prepares you for what it does to your mind. The smell lingers. The expression etched on the man's face burns into your dreams. You begin to notice how quickly others move on. They slap your shoulder, call you a warrior, pour you wine, as if it's a badge, not a burden. You try to match their enthusiasm, to act as if you've stepped fully into your role. But part of you stays back on that field, staring at the body cooling in the dirt. The next time comes easier. That's what scares you. You start to understand the rhythm of violence, the timing, the angles, the pressure. It becomes mechanical. You learn how to end a life without hesitation. And with that, something in you begins to quiet. Not peace, just a muting of the voice that once protested. You stop asking if it was justified. You stop wondering who he was, if he had a wife, a child, a story. It's not that you forget, it's that remembering becomes too heavy. And the more you carry, the more you must bury. Some nights drown it in drink, others in prayer. A few try to atone, to balance the blood with acts of mercy. But most just carry on, efficient, respected, empty. When peasants cheer as you ride through the village, you wonder what they'd do if they saw the things your hands have done. When children ask if you've ever killed anyone, you lie. Not to protect them, but to protect whatever's left of the man you used to be. Because knighthood doesn't just ask for your strength. It demands your soul in pieces. And every life you take, you give something in return. A sliver of innocence, a shade of humanity, a corner of your conscience. By the end, what's left of you is hard and quiet and useful. But it's not whole. And that's the unspoken truth. To become the sword, you must first lose the hand that trembles. In the end, you realize knighthood was never really about you. From the moment you first carried a wooden sword, every step was taken in someone else's shadow. You trained to protect a lord's land, not your own. You fought to uphold a banner that bore another man's name. Even your victories were handed off, offered as tribute to the house you served. The songs, if they come at all, are not about the man inside the armor, but the crest on his chest. You begin to wonder if that was the point all along, to strip you down until only the role remains. You aren't a person. You're a function, a presence at the Lord's right hand, a body on the battlefield, a polished shell to make the court feel safer. You were told that chivalry was sacred, that honor was eternal. But as you sit in the dark after yet another skirmish, bandaging your own leg with a bloodied rag, you can't help but laugh at how empty those words feel now. The villagers don't know your name. They see you ride by and they bow, more out of fear than respect. The clergy offers blessings, but only when the bishop is watching. Even your own squire flinches when you raise your voice. It's not hatred, it's distance. You've become something not entirely human anymore, something too worn, too armored, too far removed from the softness of ordinary life. You try to remember what you loved before all this, what made you laugh, what made you cry. The memories come in flashes. Your mother's hands, the smell of fresh bread, the feel of grass beneath bare feet. But they feel like someone else's life, someone gentler, someone who didn't know how a man's eyes look the moment he realizes he's dying. You write letters that go unanswered. You dream of home, but no longer know what it means. Maybe there's no going back. Maybe there never was. You gave everything for this title, and it took it gladly. Your youth, your tenderness, your name, all repurposed into the idea of a knight. And when the wars end, if they end, you'll be left with stories that don't quite match the scars. You'll tell them differently each time, unsure if you're trying to be honest or trying to forget. And the next generation will arrive, bright-eyed and untested, ready to become the thing you've spent your whole life trying to survive. You'll want to warn them, to tell them that knighthood is not glory, it's sacrifice in slow motion. But they won't listen. They never do. They'll march into the same cycle, eager to wear the armor, unaware of what it costs. And you'll fade, not with a blaze, but like a candle in the corner of a cold hall, quietly, inevitably, unseen. That's how knighthood ends. Not in triumph, not in peace, but in the slow, steady vanishing of the man beneath the steel. There's an irony to it all, how the very people who demanded your strength now recoil at your presence. You return from campaign expecting, maybe foolishly, a bit of gratitude, a warm hearth, a kind word. Instead, you're met with stiff nods, averted eyes, and forced courtesies. The nobility invites you to feast, but you're seated near the doors, far from the fire, beside merchants and lesser knights. They ask you to recount the battles, but only the palatable parts. Leave out the screams, the starvation, the friend you had to leave behind. Keep it clean. Keep it noble. You become entertainment, not a guest. A walking tale, not a man. Your armor, once admired, now clangs too loudly in their silent halls. You carry the scent of blood and ash and old leather, and they smell it even when you don't. Some whisper that you've changed. Others say you were always this way and they just hadn't noticed. They smile when you arrive and sigh when you leave. You try to ignore it. You tell yourself they fear what you've seen, not what you are. But part of you wonders if there's something in your eyes now, some trace of what you had to become to survive. You walk through the town, and children stare but don't wave. Mothers pull them gently away. You hear the word killer mumbled behind you, not in anger, but with that peculiar mix of awe and discomfort that people reserve for things they don't fully understand. You want to explain, to say that you didn't choose the path, that you didn't ask for this, but the words don't come. And even if they did, who would listen? The scribes don't write songs about men who came home too quiet. The priests don't bless stories that end in disillusionment. The bards need heroes, not warnings. You were forged in a world of duty and sharpened on its cruelty. And now, standing on the edge of it, there is no place left for you to rest. You try to blend in. You remove the tabard. You let the stubble grow. But the walk gives you away. The stare, the silence. You are a knight through and through, marked not just by deeds, but by what you've had to unlearn. How to laugh freely, how to cry without shame, how to sit still without expecting a horn blast or a scream in the distance. You begin to understand why so many veterans take to the road, wandering with only a horse and a memory. It's not escape they seek, but space. Space to be something other than a weapon. Space to feel without being dissected. Space to forget, or at least to remember without judgment. And so when your mail shirt rusts and your name fades from the rolls, you ride. Not away from war, but toward the faint hope that somewhere, on a road without banners or commands, you might finally be allowed to exist simply as yourself. You start to notice the silence first. Not the peaceful kind, but the hollow one. The kind that follows you from room to room, through castle halls and village roads. People no longer greet you as they once did. The cheering fades, the invitations dry up, and even your fellow knights grow quieter around you. It's not that you've done anything wrong, you've simply lingered too long. There's a strange shelf life to men like you. In the early years, you're useful, admirable, strong, quick, fierce. But time wears the shine off even the sharpest blade. Now, your scars speak louder than your words. You're still respected, in theory. They nod when you enter. They still call you sir. But their eyes slide past you. They speak over you. You've become a relic, living proof of a past they'd rather not think about. The younger knights avoid your gaze. Maybe they fear becoming you. Maybe they think they never will. They still believe they'll retire rich, that they'll win renown, that their sword will write their name into legend. You once thought that too. Now, you sit at the edge of the feast hall, picking at bread gone stale, nursing ale gone warm, and listening to laughter you're not part of. You used to be the one toasting the loudest. Now your voice feels foreign in your own throat. You think about leaving, about taking what little coin you have and disappearing into the countryside. But where would you go? You've spent your whole life under orders, in armor. You wouldn't know how to sow a field or run a shop. You were never taught those things. Your only skill is surviving pain. And in peace, even that becomes obsolete. So, you linger. You walk the castle battlements at dawn, more out of habit than duty. You sleep lightly, waiting for alarms that never sound. You keep your sword sharp even though it hasn't left its sheath in months. Some part of you still believes you'll be needed, that another war will come and they'll call for you. But deep down, you know they won't. Not anymore. They have younger men now, men with clean armor and unbroken hands. You've been passed over, slowly and without ceremony. One day, the steward forgets to include you in the roster. No one corrects him. Another day, a feast is held in your own hall, but your seat is missing. You stand there for a long moment, unsure if it's a mistake. Then you realize it's not. You're no longer part of the story. You're the chapter people skim past. You return to your quarters, sit on your cot, and listen to the distant noise of a world that no longer needs your protection. You were forged for war, shaped to serve. But no one tells a knight how to live after his purpose has left him behind. You begin to understand that the hardest battle isn't fought on a field. It's fought in the quiet afterward, when the armor is off, and you're left alone with who you've become. The chapel is colder now than you remember. Or maybe it's just you. The stone floor bites into your knees as you kneel for morning prayers, but you've long since stopped feeling it. The words spill from your lips like muscle memory. Latin syllables shaped more by habit than belief. Once you prayed with urgency, for victory, for mercy, for the safe return of comrades. Now you pray mostly out of obligation, because knights are meant to be men of faith, because some part of you still fears what lies beyond. The church has always been your shadow companion. It blessed your sword. It forgave your sins. It promised salvation for obedience. But the older you get, the more those promises feel like distant bells, beautiful, hollow, unreachable. You've seen too much to believe blindly. Too many blessed men falling to disease, to betrayal, to cold steel. Too many so-called sinners dying with peace in their eyes. You still confess, though. You line up outside the wooden booth, alongside squires and cooks and soldiers. You whisper your failings through a screen and listen to the murmured absolution. But nothing really lifts from you. The weight remains. Not because you doubt God exactly, but because you doubt that any words, no matter how sacred, can erase what you've done or what you've become. You've spilled blood for causes that no longer seem just. You've stood silent while innocence burned. You've obeyed orders that twisted your stomach. And you did it all with a bowed head and a polished blade because that was your duty. That was what was expected. The church taught you that suffering was holy, that your trials forged you into something righteous. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, you wonder if it just broke something instead. You listen to the sermons about purity, about humility, about peace. And yet your hands, these hands, know only violence. You look up at the stained glass, at saints with serene faces and golden halos, and you feel like an intruder in their company. You try to believe there's still a place for you in their stories, but belief doesn't come easy anymore. You stay anyway. You sit through the mass. You light the candle, you kneel again. Because even if you no longer believe in being forgiven, you still long for it. Because if there's no redemption, then all of this, all the bruises, the dead friends, the sacrifices, becomes too much to carry. You watch the priest lift the chalice. You taste the wine, dry and bitter. You close your eyes and imagine it washing something away. But when you open them, the world is still the same. The shadows still cling to you. The silence still follows. And you walk out of the chapel, not lighter, but simply reminded that even faith, like armor, can crack after too many blows. And when it does, all you have left is the ritual, and the hope that one day that might be enough. You hear it before you see it, the familiar clatter of hooves on stone, the jingle of bridles, the rhythmic march of steel boots. Another procession, another generation. They ride past the courtyard, fresh-faced and proud, their tabards crisp, their armor polished to a shine that hasn't yet dulled from sweat and mud. The squires beam like they've just been crowned, and the young knights sit tall in their saddles, spines straight, with the weight of expectation they haven't yet learned to resent. You stand in the shadows of the gatehouse, unseen, half forgotten. They don't know your name. They don't know the wars you fought, or the brothers you buried, or the promises made and broken under flags that now hang in dusty corners. To them, you are part of the background, a figure from another time, a story told by someone older. You don't envy them, not their optimism, not their strength. But you do remember it. You remember the way it felt to believe that knighthood was a calling, that glory could be earned, that duty was noble. You remember the day you first wore the armor and thought it made you invincible. Now, you know better. You know how heavy it truly is. You know what it covers and what it cannot protect. You watch them ride out, and you wonder which ones will come back changed, which ones won't come back at all, and which ones will return only to find the world they left behind has no place left for them. You think of saying something, offering a warning, or maybe a blessing, but you stay quiet, because words don't stop swords. And even if they did, the young don't listen. They have to see for themselves, just as you did, just as every night before you did. So you turn away and go about your tasks. Feed the horse, mend the strap, check the gate. Things that keep your hands moving and your thoughts from wandering too far. Later, one of the squires will ask your name, not out of curiosity, but obligation, and you'll give it with a smile that hides the weight behind it. They'll nod, thank you, and forget it by dusk. That's how it goes now. You've become the echo in someone else's story. But sometimes, at night, you sit by the fire and let yourself remember, not the battles, not the blood, but the early days. The friendships forged before the weight set in. The small moments that made the pain worth enduring. A laugh shared over rations. A song hummed in the dark. A promise whispered before dawn. These are the memories that survive when the banners fall and the titles fade. These are the things that no steel can carry. And in those quiet moments, even as the world moves on without you, you remind yourself that you were there. You lived it, all of it. And even if no one sings of your name, you know what it cost. And you know it was real. When the armor is finally hung for the last time, when the sword no longer fits your grip, and your name no longer appears on any roll or muster, there is a moment, brief, quiet, when you sit alone and ask yourself if it was worth it. Not aloud, not to anyone else, just to yourself. The castle still stands, its banners still fly, and the world moves forward with or without you. But the shape of your life, The long shadow of everything you endured remains etched into your bones. You gave your years to steel and silence, to causes you sometimes believed in and sometimes simply obeyed. You were told you were a hero, a protector, a symbol. And maybe for a time, you were. But in the final tally, no song captures the nights you woke gasping from a dream of the battlefield. No scroll records the way your hands shake when the cold sets in or how your body aches from wounds that never quite healed. They don't mention the faces you still see, the ones you couldn't save, the ones you had to strike down. Those memories are yours alone, and yet, despite it all, you don't regret the service. You regret the silence, the way you never spoke of what it truly meant, the way you swallowed your pain and wore duty like a mask, even when it cracked. You wish you had told the truth sooner, that knighthood wasn't a life of glory, but a slow unraveling stitched together by moments of grace, a life shaped more by endurance than by triumph. You were never the shining figure in the stories. You were the one in the mud, the one who stood while others ran, the one who rode back wounded so others could live. And in that, maybe, there was a kind of nobility. Not the kind they sing about, but the kind that lasts. You've outlived many things, lords, wars, ideals, and now in these final years you find a strange kind of peace in simplicity, a bench in the sun, a loaf of bread shared without ceremony, the laughter of children who never knew war. You watch them and hope they never do. And when someone asks, as they sometimes do, what it was like to be a knight, you smile and give them the polite version, the version with banners and tournaments and honor, because the truth is too heavy for those who haven't carried it. But later, when you're alone again, you speak softly to the walls, to the ghosts, to yourself. You say the real story, the one that hurt, the one that mattered. And for a moment, the silence listens. And in that stillness, you finally understand. Knighthood didn't make you a legend. It made you a survivor. And perhaps in a world built on war and pride, that is the rarest honor of all.